Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started with Planning Commission tonight. Glad to see a full house of concerned citizens. This is a Planning Commission, not City Council, in case you're at the wrong meeting. Anyway, we're glad to have you here. We've got Commissioner Argyle here that doesn't have a name tag, but that's what he'll answer to, is Mr. Argyle. We'll go ahead and get started with the Pledge of Allegiance, and if we'll all stand, I'll lead us in this. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, the first item on the agenda is to approve the minutes for June 5th and June 26th. Any of the commissioners want to comment or make a motion to approve?
Make a motion that we approve the minutes from June 5th and June 26th.
Okay, we got a motion, and do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we've got a, next item is a staff presentation on the River Bottoms vision.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Before that, just a couple of notes on the agenda. First of all, so you sort of know what's coming. I wanted to mention this before the meeting on the Title 15 amendments. You've just had those for a few days. I do hope to kind of go through those point by point. When we did that in the Development Review Committee meeting last week, it took about 20 minutes to do that, but that's our hope to do at the end of the agenda, and we have requested that item C, under 5, the zone changes, the Leland Mill proposal be continued, perhaps to your next meeting, maybe at some date even later than that.
Okay.
The River Bottoms vision. I thought that we'd probably have this conversation 8 or 9 months ago. It's a project that's been in the works for quite some time. You've been involved in it from the beginning. So I'm going to be really, really brief tonight. And just simply by way of an update, we do have now what we think is very, very close to a final draft. We've had that available for people to review on the city website now, also just for a few days. Maybe Mike, if you could just pull it up. It's fairly easy to find. I think if you search River Bottoms Vision on the city's web page, it'll take you to this. We have it noted as the August 29 version, so that we just be clear about what particular rendition we're working with. And in a nutshell, and this is a very succinct description of what the vision for the River Bottoms is. First of all, the concept is to limit development in the river bottoms. The vision talks about how to do that and how to balance the value that the community has for an undeveloped river bottoms with the value that property owners have with potential development in the river bottoms, potentially moving development rights either from one part of the river bottoms to another, or from the river bottoms to elsewhere in the community, is discussed extensively in the plan as a potential way to accomplish that vision of, again, limiting development in the river bottoms. Another significant component of the vision has to do with particularly limiting development in the 100-year floodplain. Right now in Spanish Fork, there's been very little development that's happened in the floodplain, and I'll just speak for staff. We particularly feel as though where there's an opportunity to avoid doing that, approving development in the floodplain, it makes sense to make that a very high priority. So in as much as this project is done, there's another big step that we think is probably where the rubber really starts to hit the road. We've started down that path, and it's to explore what I described a minute ago, that concept of moving development rights from one place to another. We will get some outside help to understand how to make that work as best as it possibly can, and we're committed to be at a position to talk about that in a lot more detail by the end of the year. So that would be discussions with the Planning Commission, City Council, and prior to then, we would need to have some very extensive discussions with property owners. That type of a program really doesn't work if it doesn't provide somebody the right kind of incentive to participate, and particularly where, and I'm just going to guess here, but probably close to 90% of the river bottoms is still in Utah County. It's going to have to be a cooperative effort. We've understood that for a while, but I think now we're at a point to where that concept has really become acute. And in addition to starting that path of more clearly defining what a TDR program could look like, we are kind of ramping up discussions that we're having with our colleagues at Utah County in the hopes that we can have a very, very close relationship with them as the river bottoms potentially transitions from being Utah County land to Spanish Fork City. So that's a real quick synopsis or summary of the vision that this document paints. We certainly invite everybody to review it. It's not too late to provide thoughts and comments, although I think you understand well that this is something that's been vetted extensively to the point to where, and I certainly regret this, I regret that I think that most people that have kind of followed the process, they have hit some level of fatigue. We've kind of worn people out, and I really do believe that that's unfortunate. We hope that maybe having this published now will be kind of a shot in the arm and give people another reason to maybe pay really close attention as we talk about transferring development rights.
Okay, so the reason you brought this up during this meeting was just informative, not a public meeting to talk about or discuss those kinds of things. What would you see the next step for this type of a project? What will happen next that the city might be looking for?
Great question. We anticipate probably having public hearings in October with both the Planning Commission and City Council on this document. We believe it's important for the city to somehow recognize this in a formal way as this community's vision for that area. So I don't know if that will take the form yet of maybe being a particular element to our general plan. Although I think that's probably what will happen. And in as much, it will be an advisory document that will hopefully help us be predictable relative to what a property owner might be able to expect to be able to do in the city, what would be approved, not approved, maybe how to achieve a particular desire that they might have for land use in the river bottoms.
Who drew vision? Who brought this vision up? Who's made this?
The actual authors of the document, we consulted with a company called Logan Simpson Design. So I'd give them credit as being the ones that really...
Input with staff, input with us, input with the city council.
And incidentally, for anybody that wants to know more about the process that we've been through, it's detailed very extensively in the document. It was May or maybe even April of 2000 and I'll make sure I get the year right now, 2018, so just about 18 months or so ago, that we started the process of getting input from several different groups of stakeholders. The largest by scale were just residents of Spanish Fork. There was a very concerted effort as well to meet with people that own property in the river bottoms and to get their input. And one of the things that led us to contracting with Logan Simpson to do the project was their commitment that they would interview every property owner in the river bottoms. And they spent several days in this room in a couple of different groups and in another room doing just that. Again, about a year and a half ago. There were different public meetings, there were different events that were either put on for purposes of soliciting public input or that we attended to try to take advantage of a gathering where we might be able to get people's thoughts and ideas. The effort was extensive, I guess is maybe how I really want to.
So I see several people here that own property down in the river bottoms here today. So a lot of these people have been contacted by this Logan and talked to and stuff like that.
Anybody that owned property in the study area 18 months ago would have been contacted by Logan Simpson. All I know is I saw the list of people that they reached out to, and and saw a whole lot of people, like I said, over the course of several days in the city office because of invitations.
I'm just asking, that's,
And that's all I know.
Dave, just a quick question, and this will probably come up in the future as well. In this process, there's been kind of the three main scenarios, scenario 1, 2, and 3, but never really talked about scenario 4, which is just leaving it in the county and letting it develop 5-acre lots as if it were in the county. Is there a reason why that portion of it's never really been brought up? Just leaving it how it is and letting developers buy it and develop it 5 acres if that's what they want to, and not taking on that
mass.
almost a burden in my mind
Yeah.
for the city to try and do what they're trying to do. It's a big project. Why does the city even want to try and do this?
So a couple of questions there, right? So, and just relative to that scenario of the property remaining in the county and developing according to Utah County zoning provisions, that doesn't require us to do anything. So I think that's why that's why we haven't then talked about it additionally, right? You could say that that's sort of, we call it sometimes a no build or a no change scenario. That's just the path that things are on now. And that requires no further action on the city's part. And we could talk about whether that's the best option to choose or not. And in all honesty, that's been the city's position to date. There certainly have been many opportunities that the city's had over the course of the last 15 or 20 years to annex land in the river bottoms. And I think frankly, many of us that might provide input on decisions like that have felt like, for the time being at least, it made the most sense to leave it in Utah County. A city council can't be compelled to approve an annexation. So without Spanish Fork City Council approving the annexation of land in the river bottoms, it doesn't happen. Now, why it might be worth that effort and trouble to annex and to regulate what happens in the river bottoms, I think through this process we've come to understand that Spanish Fork City residents care a lot about what happens in the river bottoms. And I think even just that development pattern, allowing for the very limited development that it would permit, 1 home per 5 acres throughout the vast majority of the river bottoms. My interpretation of what we've heard through the input process is that even that is a significant concern to residents of the community. Even though it wouldn't be in the city, right? It's neighboring jurisdiction and different things like that. So that's my answer as to why we've talked about going through that additional effort. And I've got to say this as well. The river bottoms for 20 plus years now, I think back to when cities were required to first file annexation policies where we defined what lands potentially would be annexed in a city's future. The river bottoms has been a part of that policy from that point in time. So there is something of a feeling that annexation into Spanish Fork is going to happen. It's just a matter of when. I think that's led to just that concern about trying to manage what happens then in the river bottoms.
And annexation, just so I'm clear, is the property owner approaching the city requesting an annexation, not the other way around. Is that correct?
It certainly can happen either way. There are provisions in the state code for municipalities to initiate annexations. Most of the annexations that have happened in Spanish Fork's history have been initiated by private property owners. And I think under every circumstance, there has to be the consent of property owners to annex. We have initiated annexations in the past as the city, at least a few in the last 15 years. But in each of those cases where they've ultimately been approved, it's been because the property owners were,
So has the county been approached? Have you talked to the county about annexations or what their future plans are for that? And also, have you talked to MAG about the road systems and stuff like that that we're planning on eventually having to build through the river bottoms? Has that been approached or brought into the vision that we've talked about?
From the beginning, we've talked with Utah County in several different forums. We've met with our colleagues at Public Works and planning staff levels. We've met with the elected officials at the county. We've had some conversations with elected officials in public meetings about the project. Given where we're at now, we're scheduling subsequent meetings with them to follow up and frankly to report on the project and where we're at. And I've appreciated very much so the willingness of the people at Utah County to listen. I think they understand the concerns that have led us to do this project. I think they see other communities that have the same types of concerns about development in certain parts of the county. And I'm optimistic that there's going to be some desire to coordinate and to cooperate relative to this effort that we've done. Mountain Land Association of Governments, they're charged largely with planning for regional transportation facilities throughout the valley. There's one roadway that's planned to go through Spanish Fork, east of Main Street, north-south. It's probably going to be a pretty significant road someday. Maybe or maybe not in the next 20 years, though. I think certainly not in the next 10. This is not an imminent thing, but absolutely, we've coordinated with them relative to that facility to make sure that it's a part of our bigger planning effort as the city for our transportation network and just to make sure that things work in a regional setting.
Turn into that, though.
Pardon me?
You wouldn't want that to turn into an intimate type of, issue.
Like a surprise? Yeah, absolutely. The people with Mountain Land Association of Governments, in my experience, they're really concerned about getting from point A to point B. So they would afford us considerable latitude relative to how a road might get through a community. In this case, they're worried about getting people from maybe Elk Ridge and Salem, east of Main Street, up to US Highway 6 and maybe beyond to the north. And we understand why that's a concern and we agree with it. And incidentally, on that issue, as folks look through this, I really want to call it the final edition, although that's maybe still just a little bit premature. You'll see that the alignment for a road that I think you're maybe referencing has changed even from what we presented a few months ago. We think that's an enhancement, and the folks that you talked about at MAG, they're comfortable with that. That's another thing that we coordinate with Utah County on though as well, given that if somebody were to develop property in the county today adjacent to that alignment or that planned alignment, we'd kind of be at the county's mercy to make sure that they have the provisions in place relative to their transportation master plan and zoning code to make sure that that corridor is preserved. Otherwise, we'd have some issues to deal with.
Well, I want to read the vision and stuff like that a little bit more. Like sort of what Kevin's saying. I like it just, we talked about open space for many, many years, especially when I was on the city council and had a couple of people come in and talk to us about it. And especially with the floodplains and everything else, it almost makes reason to believe that, to keep it in the county, you've got 5 acres, 200 feet, in frontage, and it just makes perfect sense just to leave it alone. But then again, we have a lot of property owners here that, might want to change their mind and want developers to come in and buy their property. And finally, it's time to retire and get a little money in their pocket. And they would like the city to annex it and do some density type of projects there. So we know we got areas that we can't do high density, but there's areas that we could do a little bit of a density type of deal down there. You see East Bench, I look at that and how pretty that was at one time, and now and it's still beautiful up there, but there's just a lot of homes now, and I know there's a lot of people that are very concerned about the the river bottoms and how beautiful it is right now, especially when you're looking over the river bottoms and seeing how beautiful it is, and you want to preserve that and keep it that way. But, you know, property owners are property owners, and, you know, I had some ground down in Palmyra. I sold it last year, you know, and I loved it, and I didn't think I'd ever sell it, but somebody gave me a good offer, and I sold it. I don't know what they're gonna do with it now, but the bottom line is that's progression. I mean, that's processing, and I know there's a lot of concerned citizens down here right now that want to preserve it and keep it the way it is. And then I know there's a few people here that want to develop and make their money because they're holding on to ground that they've bought and stuff like that. So anyway, it's going to be quite the deal.
Buckle up.
Buckle up, huh? I guess we'll get called ugly names some more, huh?
See no reason for that,
Yeah.
right? There's no need.
I've been
Well.
reading Facebook. I've been seeing what people say about me and all them false things that people say about Richard Davis, and they're all false. You know, they're not right, and all I do is just trying to be a good guy.
And you are.
Yep. Well, I think good planning is a lot better than no planning at all. And it seems like there's really been no plan for the river bottom for a long time. The culture, there hasn't been a lot of motivation to do anything. But I would challenge all the citizens to read this vision and get prepared and come to some public meetings in the future. And because at least if you've got a plan that the majority of the city wants, then that's better, in my opinion, than just rapid, let's throw up a 5-acre with one home, and then somebody does a 30-acre and they got one home, and with no really plan of attack or structure to an area that's really beautiful and it's got a river on it, it's got a trail system on it, and I think done properly, it could be a lot better than a modge podge of whatever happens. I think that's poor planning for a city our size and where we're at. And the trick will be trying to get the community as a whole, and it's not going to please everybody, but if we can get the majority, then that's my personal opinion. I think it's better than no plan at all. So thank you for the information.
Thank you.
We're not going to have any
Appreciate
more
that.
slides on this. We'll just challenge everybody to read up on it and be looking for a future meeting with the Planning Commission and City Council, correct?
Absolutely, and as commissioners, if any of you want to take additional time to review things, if you have thoughts or concerns, we'd love to hear those, just as they
Okay.
might come to mind, so, thank you.
Okay, item 4 on the agenda is a conditional use permit for hideout storage and then Hearthstone Manor addition. These will be public hearing. We'll start with the hideout storage first. Brandon, you're going to entertain us now, huh?
Entertain you, I'll try. I think the applicant looks way too comfortable on the back row, so we'll invite him up shortly. I appreciate you being here tonight. It's a great service that you provide to the community. As you mentioned, the 2 items we've got next on the agenda, they're both conditional use permits, and so we will request that you hold a public hearing on both items. Both of these have come before you previously, and so hopefully they're not new at this point. The first one is the hideout storage conditional use permit and site plan. So this did come before you back in May of 2018. And then it did come before you shortly before this meeting as well, as we kind of looked at zoning in general for the area and what changes have occurred over time. This last came before you as we were considering a rezone of the property. Since that meeting, the council did table, I guess you could say, or deny the rezone that was in process, so that the applicant could have the opportunity to renew their application. The approval that had previously been given for the site had expired. The applicant did subsequently then make a complete application to the city, get it into the review process. So here we are before you again tonight. We do have the conditions and information from 2018 if that's necessary. In a nutshell, and the applicant can correct me if I'm wrong, minimal changes to what was brought to you back in 2018. The property still is zoned I-2. It's an industrial zone, and the storage units are a conditional use permit in the I-2 zone. And so what that means is it's a use that potentially may have some impacts that need to be mitigated. And so as the Planning Commission, you have the ability to look at those and say, okay, are there conditions that we can place that might address some of the noise, other light, whatever the detrimental impact may be. We did take this to the DRC for their review, the site plan and the conditional use permit. What we're looking at here is the site plan. If we can jump to the landscaping slide. I believe it's in the,
Brandon, is this the same site plan as we approved in 2018 then? Or has,
There are slight changes as far as the building style. Is that correct? Yeah.
okay,
Yes, from the outside, yes. As far as the landscaping, the walls. Nothing's changed. It's just the interior, so the building footprint here
Okay.
on the inside. I believe that's just due to market.
Due to soil conditions too.
There is very extensive history with the soil and things of that nature. I'll let the applicant speak to that. And so from here you can see kind of a different layout than what we previously had, which was larger, which is on your staff report if you compare that with that. So the DRC did recommend approval of the site plan contingent upon the Planning Commission approving the conditional use permit. And so here we are tonight before you for site plan and conditional use permit approval. This image here shows the landscaping plan superimposed over an aerial image of the area, just to kind of give you an idea of how it's oriented on the site versus its surroundings. So some of the key issues that were discussed with the DRC, which led to the loan condition that we have written in the staff report, were the setbacks. And so we do have an ability where the setbacks can be approved as shown. Generally, those would be a 50-foot, but if there's better design or better ways to dress up the exterior, such as with landscaping, those can be slightly reduced. We talked about the landscaping, which is shown here. There's also a wall around the property. So on the east and the south property lines, you can see the buildings will function as both the wall and the back and the building itself, the units. And then on the west and the north side, there will be a wall installed as well as the landscaping. Signage in 2018, there was a condition as far as limiting internally illuminated signage, I believe on Del Monte, and that would not be permitted. At this point, we haven't seen a sign package, but that's very appropriate to discuss with the applicant if there's any desire to do signage on Del Monte or if it's all going to be on Arrowhead. And then just generally, anytime you have a facility, if there's going to be any impacts as far as lighting on the adjacent properties, and usually that can be addressed as far as style of lighting, directional shielding, things of that nature. And so what the recommendation from staff and from the DRC was that the applicant address any of the minor remaining red line review comments as far as staff review goes, and then if there's any other conditions that need to be discussed tonight, you have the ability to kind of work through those and apply some conditions to any approval that you might give. Any questions for staff before we turn some time over to the applicant?
No.
Awesome. Thank you.
okay. Mike just mentioned that we did see this as a planning commission a year ago, and under similar consequences or situation. This is a particular project that's approved in this zone. The only stipulation is we can put conditions to it. And so this planning commission spent a lot of time and made them return and see us several times to dress up the landscaping with setbacks and fencing and lighting. And from what they presented to us the first time, big improvement cosmetically for the community. Again, this is an approved use. We couldn't say no. We just could only apply conditions to it. So just wanted to mention that to the community and those that are attending tonight. It's just that this application has a 1-year lapse, and it's lapsed, and they still want to build the project, and so they're in here basically to do the same thing. We'll ask the developer to come up and make any comments.
Good evening. My name's Ken Menlove with Menlove Construction. I am the applicant, and the owners are here tonight as well to answer any questions. But I think Brandon's presented everything really well, so I'm just here to answer any questions you might have. The one thing that did change that Brandon mentioned were the interior buildings. We made those a little bit bigger, mainly because of the soil conditions, eliminated aisleways where the water and the drainage can get into the soils, because that's where a lot of the problems can occur. And so we've made that change internally. And but all the perimeter buildings, the landscaping, the walls, nothing's changed. The facades, the exterior elevations, we haven't made any of those changes at all. So there won't be any, aesthetic changes at all to the project. So, but just here to answer any questions you might have, or the owners can address them as well. So,
Ken, would you mind telling us what the construction materials are going to be like?
yeah. So the perimeter, the exterior materials facing the roads will be masonry, colored masonry of different colors and textures, and then there will be some cement board as well and some stone. The office we changed last year to make it look more residential. Originally it was designed to be more commercial looking, but we changed the roof and everything to be more residential looking. So the office will basically look like a nice 2-level custom home. But yeah, all the materials facing the road are going to be block, stone, but all colored. And then I think there is a little bit of architectural metal and stone and some hardy board as well. And then internally too, the buildings are also masonry with, of course, storage unit doors. The perimeter wall will be precast concrete wall to look like stone, and they come in and stain it later. So it looks like a nice ledge stone fence that you've seen around the city.
So that will tie into this community because they already have a wall like that on this community. On
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, yeah.
Is this the new plan or is this the old one?
This is the new site plan. Yeah. And the only reason they didn't update the landscape plan, because the landscaping didn't change at all, only the internal buildings. We did do a new site lighting plan, and the photometrics still work out great. It's all dark sky lighting, all LED wall packs that, shine down to the ground. So at night, it's very dark inside. And those will be controlled with timers so they can be turned off and controlled that way.
When we met before on this, we talked quite a bit about signage on Del Monte and the condition that it would only be on, IFA Road, what's that road? Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Is that still the case?
Is that still the case? Yeah, the owners say yes, that's true.
And the colors, I'm looking at the PDF.
Yeah,
The colors of the office building, are they the same as what I'm seeing in the PDF? The
Yeah, do we-
black, the gray.
yeah. I don't think the colors have changed at all. Do we have that up on this here? Let's see if we have those. I know sometimes I know the owners haven't really changed anything, but. Yeah, it might be just in the staff report, but yeah, the colors haven't changed. I think the colors are fine. Yeah. I know, because I know last year, like you mentioned, Brad, we we went to extensive lengths to change and make sure it looked really good, even on the materials, and nothing's changed. Yeah, yeah, we only changed these buildings inside, the shape and configuration, mainly because of the soils. But you actually have less perimeter here and less drive aisles, so we're not disturbing, we don't have as much area to put the storm drain into the soil, which is our biggest concern. And
If it's approved, what's your timeline as far as construction getting underway?
if this gets approved, we're ready to submit plans again for building permit, probably in about, 3 to 4 weeks, and then get bank approval again, so they're hoping. Yeah, they already have bank approval, so, it'd be a matter of just as soon as we can get a building permit, so probably within, 6 to 8 weeks, 6 weeks, getting started, getting it going, so. Yeah, those colors look good. I think that's what the owners are after.
Maybe just to clarify, as far as the signage, would there be signage on the office, or where would we be seeing the signage?
I don't think, where do we want signage ultimately? And one of the owners could come up and address, but I think they eliminated signage on the office in the last approval, right? That was eliminated, so I think it ended up being a monument sign and.
Which is a great place for a sign.
Which I think was part of trying to keep a whole bunch of
Ye-
signs off that exterior wall as well.
Yes, yes,
Maybe an appropriate condition to add to the motion that
yeah,
addressing the signage.
Southwest corner of the property.
yeah. So you want to put it at the corner of the two roads or at the southwest corner?
Oh, sorry, Mike. Jump back to the side.
Southwest corner right there right there, right?
Right here? Yeah, because there's going to be a lot of landscaping in here, blocking the walls anyway, ultimately. And so I think out here is perfect. That's where they're going to want it, so. Yeah, we're ready to get going. We have pricing from the original project, and so we just have to update the bids, and they already have bank approval, and so now it's just a matter of getting a building permit, which we can probably get in, hopefully in about 8 weeks, so 6 to 8 weeks. Thank you.
Any other questions from the commissioners? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So Brandon, you presented this by itself. We'll treat this separately than the other project, right? Yeah, okay. So this is a public hearing. Going to go ahead and move into a public hearing. If anyone wants to come up, and if you come up, introduce yourself to the microphone so the TV can pick it up. We've got a thumbs up back there by Channel 17. Anyway, this is the time for a public hearing on this topic. Okay, and seeing no interest, we'll close the public hearing. Commissioners, is there any other discussion before someone maybe wants to make a motion?
Covered everything.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd entertain a motion then, Commissioners.
I'll make a motion that we recommend. Approve, okay. Make a motion that we approve the conditional use permit and site plan for the hideout storage with the added condition that the signage be located on the southwest corner of the property.
Okay, we got a motion.
And conditions
Want
and
to
findings.
just verify, is that southwest or southeast corner?
Southeast, yep.
I'll
Along with
second
the
that.
other findings and conditions.
I'll second that.
We got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Go get that building permit. Good luck, gentlemen. Okay, the next item on conditional use permit is the Hearthstone Manor addition.
If we can jump to that site plan, Mike, that would be great. So this one's got a more extensive history, and so I probably can't provide you as much detail for this site. What I can share with you is the applicant is here tonight, eager to seek approval for the addition. Oh, let's go to the next slide, Sari. So, the existing facility, oh, there we go, is outlined here. And the proposal is this new addition here. So if we can jump, sorry to make you work overtime, but if we can jump to an aerial that has no building laid out on it so you can see the current site, that would be great. Perfect, thanks, Mike. So this is the current facility layout. You see the parking lot to the south, and so the building addition would be coming off of the south end of the property. And then with the proposal, there would be some of this grass landscaping removed here, so we'd have some parking here, and then there'd be some parking here, and then some of this landscaping would go away, but then we'd get some additional landscaping as far as screening and buffering, which would be some trees placed so that over time it'll help provide some screening and buffer. So the applicant is here requesting that the expansion be, or excuse me, the addition be approved. Property is currently in our R112 residential zone. And so similar to the last item that we had, this is coming before you for your review. The only condition that the staff has added is that the applicant make minor modifications to the landscape plan. The current landscape plan does show some trees along the south, and then the request is also to keep the same spacing along the west where the new building addition is coming down. We have had an opportunity to review the proposal as far as compliance with parking and other requirements that the city codes require they adhere to, and the project is good in those items.
So the parking meets the city standards, okay?
Do you know about how many new rooms they will add in that?
13, thank you. I'll probably let the applicant come up and speak to the actual interior as far as rooms and beds and how that's increasing, and maybe provide a little input on how successful this site is operating. Is there any questions for staff at this time? All right, thank you.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you. My name's Craig Hermanson. This is architect Aaron on here. I've owned Hearthstone Manor for about 2.5 years. The facility dates back to 2000. So this was one of the existing properties in the neighborhood. When I purchased it, it was licensed for, so it had 22 rooms with a licensing of 32 beds. It did have a memory care unit in it at that time to where they could have double occupancy. So what we've requested with this build out is to add 13 additional rooms to take it from 22 rooms to 35 with a new state license occupancy of 45 beds. And so we're not going up that many in beds because we've removed the Alzheimer and dementia units, and now they're just individual studios for the elderly. What questions, as far as the architect, and I know you had some questions on color and design, it's gonna match the existing building, the same stone, stucco. We're gonna upgrade, instead of the siding, we're gonna upgrade kind of a nicer panel board to last through these, through the winds, to upgrade that. We're planning on doing some additional upgrades to the landscaping, and just to make it look nice. We've done a lot of work there. Our goal, our philosophy is to create a home style environment so that the elderly come here feel like they're at home. And so that's kind of the whole idea and the plan, that and the approach that we're taking here.
The parking and landscaping's our big concerns, because you're in a neighborhood, you know, you're residential neighbors and everything else, and so you want to adhere to the property and make sure that you're looking the same as you were before, basically, even though you've added on. But if that conforms to what we're looking at, then I don't have. I did the concrete work on that many years ago, about 2000. I did it legally too, you know that?
Better of, Richard.
It was all legal, it was all, you know, didn't do anything bad.
There's no
with the-
statute of
Didn't do anything
limitations
bad
on
with the
concrete
city or
work.
anything else. They give it to me legally, and
You got, I assume there's on-street parking in this location as well, if they needed to, right?
Well, there is, but we really try to avoid that. But, you know, in a facility like this, there's not one resident that has a car. And so in the image that you saw, you had my bus, you had my truck, and then we had a couple of staff folks. The only time we really get vehicles in there is when we have like church services or some volunteer events. But for the most part, the parking that you see here is going to be underutilized.
So you've never had issues with parking the way it is currently?
No, we did a survey for about 6 weeks, and because we were going to try to get a variance for the parking, because there just isn't a need, and I wanted to reduce some of the parking to add into the landscaping. So, but what you're seeing here is what's in the compliance with the city ordinances.
doing church work and stuff like that and going into this place, it's been very nice for your tenants there. I'll say that, so, been a good asset to the city.
Good, thank you.
And you answered my question, that was on construction, so it's gonna look very similar to the rest of the building, it's gonna fit in and look nice, so,
Yeah.
good.
Any other questions? Okay, I told my residents to watch me on Channel 17. So they're watching tonight, so hopefully I did okay.
Great.
Okay. Thank you, Craig.
Okay, thanks.
Aaron, did you have anything to add for the architecture? You all right? Okay. Okay. Okay, if it's okay with the commissioners, I'm going to move into public hearing. We'll go into public hearing on this. Again, if you'd like to come up, make a comment from the community. I get a feeling we're going to get some people up here at some point. Oh, here we go. We got to take her. Go ahead and introduce yourself. Thank you for coming out tonight.
Wasn't planning on coming up, but we are the house, I'm Shirley Baxter.
Shirley?
We are the
Okay.
house that is south of the Hearthstone.
Shirley, can you point that out with the little right there in front of you? There's a little
This?
pointer there. If you'll just take it and just point right there where you're at so we can see. Here's where the Hearthstone is.
Yes, right at the end of it.
Button.
No, on the side, it's just on the side, right there.
You have to hold it down.
We are right there.
Okay.
The log home, right?
Yes, the log home. We've been there 25 years. So my question is, with him building on right there, how far is he going to be from the property line? Now that
With the
is-
building?
Yeah, now that he's extending out, is he set back?
Within the standards?
Yeah,
Okay.
What are the setbacks? Or what are the legal? Okay, and legal setbacks are 15 to 20, and you're 44 feet, so you're well behind the setback. Okay.
And in that 44 feet, we still have at least, I believe it's 14, 15 feet of landscaping and the trees, and there will be the fence.
A little bit of a buffer with landscaping and the fence.
The parking will be removed from that side and relocated to the front.
There is a road that will go down there. That's not for parking. That is strictly for fire access.
And the dumpster.
And the dumpster.
so will the dumpster be moved closer to our property then?
It looks like, is that correct? Yeah. Is that dotted line represent a setback at all?
So realistically, legally, if anybody wanted to, they could build right up to the setback? Is that how that works?
As long as they're complying with any other ordinance requirements such as a landscaping buffer and transition area.
Okay.
So generally, your setbacks are your building envelope.
Okay.
Okay,
My other question was, we noticed that he had it surveyed, so he's got some stakes out there. I know that when Mr. is it Matthews owned it, you bought it from him, he put up the south side fence, and he put it a foot off of his line. So now, my question, are you changing that
So when you
south,
say foot off, you mean it's on our property?
our, no,
No, it's on
your
my property.
fence is on your property, so there's a foot past the fence.
Oh, we're not gonna touch the fence.
Okay, we were wondering, because you put stakes out there, and so we were wondering if you were going to change the fence.
Right. So what she's referring to is out on the curb and gutter. If you look down the property line, they put a stake
oh,
on,
could,
oh, I'm sorry.
no, that's okay.
So, can I see?
Yeah.
Okay, so,
Mhm.
so when the surveyors came, they put on the curb where where the property line is, and it's right there.
Yeah.
And so it's right
See,
here.
there.
Here's the stake. And so the question is, are we gonna tear this fence out and then take part of it? Are we gonna move this? And the answer is no.
Okay.
No, we're gonna leave this fence. We don't wanna incur any additional costs. We're gonna move this, the road will come here, and along with landscaping, and then the building is gonna be within the setbacks that we talked about.
And the dumpster will be back there.
And the dumpster will be back, yes, back within the,
Mhm.
this area.
Can you show that, Mr. IT guy, I like that with the Google Maps. Can you show what that fence, can you go down the road a little bit and look back?
Stakes on there.
They update every this is about 7 years from the last update to this one, so anyway.
Good timing.
Yeah, we just put it on it a couple weeks ago, so.
It's crazy.
There you go, so vinyl fence, okay. And that's what's around the perimeter, Craig?
I believe on the north side there's a chain link with a school.
Okay,
Yeah.
but the west side and this side is, or the west side matches this side,
Yeah, so
Mhm.
okay?
this side, all the way to the back, and then coming up the north side is vinyl to where it's gated. And then I have a stretch that's about the front of the building to the curb is chain link, and that's where the school is.
Okay, okay.
And we don't expect any of that to change.
Okay,
Mrs. Bastian, they've been good neighbors?
pretty quiet. We used to have a few come over. They couldn't remember where they lived, so we took them back.
Maybe
You know
we should
what?
ask Craig if they.
I do the
she's been
same
good
thing
neighbor.
like that in my own neighborhood. I'm not sure where I'm at.
Well,
Okay.
thank you for your comments and interest. Okay, thanks, Craig. Okay. Is there any other comments from the public? Okay, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing portion. Commissioners, is there any other comments, discussion on this?
I'm good.
Okay, I would entertain a motion.
Just approve.
Motion to approve the proposed site plan for Hearthstone Manors addition with the following findings and conditions.
Okay, we got a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Good. Okay, item 5 is going to be a zone change for these next 3, which also will allow a public hearing. So we'll start with the first one, Arrowhead Trail.
Yeah, not so happy to announce that we've set a record with this proposal. We have screwed up the public notice on this zone change more times than anything we've ever done in the history of Spanish Fork. So you remember, this was on your agenda last month. You made a recommendation to approve it. And as we got looking a little bit closer, we actually sent out notices for another project that we're reviewing next door, just a little bit further to the north on Del Monte Road. So nothing's changed. You know the history as to why we're concerned about having the industrial 3 zoning on the property. Staff still recommends that it be approved again. You've made that recommendation before, but we do need to hold a public hearing with the proper notice before we take it to the city council.
No action.
So this was last month, right?
It was on the agenda most recently last month, yes.
Okay. Okay. And I wasn't here, is why I asked
Were
that.
you here for the site visit? Or was that the same?
No.
Same time, probably the same time.
Okay,
Yeah, so this came up last month.
okay.
I think we recommend the city council approve the zone change, knowing that there would be a conditional use for that storage units.
So Dave, just to be clear, this is the property that we just approved the conditional use,
Yes.
and this moves it, it changes the zone to RR. If those gentlemen go ahead and build their project, they can build it. If they
Yeah, in
don't, it's
fact-
gonna end up being RR. If they wait the 12 months and don't build, then they would have lost their opportunity. Correct?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah.
okay. All right?
And they are aware of that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I hope, I think they feel like they got an opportunity to get after this, so I hope they go get their building permit. Yeah, they're still there. Okay. Is there any discussion, or we'll go into public hearing? Okay, hearing none. We're going to go into public hearing on the Arrowhead Trail zone change. Anybody here want to talk about that? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Seeing no interest. And commissioners, you get the opportunity to make a motion again.
Make a motion that we recommend city council zone change of the Arrowhead Trail property from industrial 2 to rural residential, including any findings from the DRC.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right. IFA zone change.
This is the third or fourth zone change that we've talked about, kind of in this part of the community, vicinity of Mill Road and Del Monte, Arrowhead Trail. Like the property that we just talked about, the subject property here is zoned industrial 2. And again, I'm going to be really succinct just because we've spent time talking about the overall effort that the city's making to try to get a zoning arrangement that's more consistent with the contemporary land uses that we have today and what we anticipate having in the future, something that's a better fit than what we have now. The IFA business and a property next to it are both zoned currently industrial 2. I've met with the manager of IFA and I've talked about their business with him, what they do, what they plan to do in the future, and followed up with a little bit of correspondence with him on the proposal. I was a little bit disappointed, haven't been able to totally circle back with him yet, but in essence, they're operating a retail business on the IFA site today, right? We're pretty familiar with that. And that is a permitted use in the commercial 2 zone. And we're recommending that you consider recommending that the commercial 2 zone be approved here. They do have, as part of their business, an operation that we probably would consider to be a light industrial operation. So changing the business to commercial 2 would allow them to continue doing that, but they simply wouldn't be able to expand that part of the business that's non-conforming, that's some type of a fertilizer operation. And Mr. Nguyen that I spoke with at IFA didn't seem to believe that was a concern for them. I think it's almost unfortunate that, if anything, they're probably going to be scaling that part of the business back, maybe even relocating it to another IFA operation someplace in the state. Kind of sad, right, that we see a certain part of Spanish Fork's history kind of get chipped away incrementally over time. He did not express any concerns, however, about having that be a grandfathered, non-conforming part of their operation now. We have heard from the gentleman who owns the property next to IFA, and incidentally, right now, this is industrial 2, and the property on the corner is zoned commercial 2.
Okay.
So I think one thing to consider, just kind of relative to what might happen on this end of the community someday, you've got a few different issues relative to access onto a UDOT facility. You've got some grade issues, some visibility issues and things like that, that somebody would have to certainly deal with. But I think the idea that we would see additional retail development on this corner in some kind of configuration at some point in the future is high enough that it should be taken seriously. I mean, I think it really is a bona fide opportunity that as traffic counts continue to increase on Arrowhead Trail and on Main Street, as we continue to see more residential development in the area, you know, those are all factors that lead to retail uses becoming viable. That being said, the property owner here has requested that rather than to change the zoning to commercial 2, it be changed to industrial 1. So it'd be going from industrial 2 to industrial 1.
Who made that comment? The neighbor?
The property owner.
Property owner,
Right
IFA.
here.
Okay.
So
This is
not
the one with the
IFA,
log home, right? The log home right here?
yes.
They want to change it to an I-1?
They would like I-1 zoning rather than I-2 because he believes that he may want to do some type of an office warehouse development there on that property.
And a C2 wouldn't,
Typically, the things that end up going into, but you know, that kind of tilt up oftentimes, it's that kind of construction, office, warehouse development. Those are uses that we wouldn't allow in a commercial 2 zone. So the I-1 probably would be a better fit for that. So I throw that just to maybe make the conversation a little bit more complicated. From staff's perspective, as we've said before, our concern really is the I-2 zone. We talked earlier tonight about our I-1 zone and how that really does have some pretty significant limits relative to what people can do that ends up sometimes becoming obnoxious for neighbors and that type of a thing. So I don't know that I have a big concern with the IFA property being zoned commercial 2, and at least for the time being, this neighbor's property being zoned industrial 1. Again, I think that's a significant step in the right direction. And really regardless, just from the perspective of scale, the opportunity someone would have to use this property in such a way that it would be, again, I'll just say obnoxious, you know, something that would adversely impact the neighborhood or neighbors, if even the I-2 zoning were left just on that property, would be low enough that, you know, I think we could sleep a little bit better at that point in time. But to summarize,
Put on an I-1. What's some of the,
that's a great question. To be succinct, and I think you have a list of the uses with the staff report that are allowed in some of those different zoning districts. Our I-1 zone is really kind of a catch-all zone for anything that people want to do that does not emit any obnoxious odor or sound. And therefore, you know, we're typically talking about things that happen indoors. Everything from an automotive body shop, you know, that could be in an industrial 1 zone, to a professional office building, to a fast food restaurant, It's a very, very permissive zoning district, but it wouldn't allow an asphalt batch plant or outdoor storage or any kind of outdoor manufacturing or some of the things that we do have people ask to do in the community. And they do look for properties that are zoned I-2 to be able to do
So are
that.
we asking to split that off and maybe talk C2 on the IFA property and I1 on this one?
I think that's one very viable option for you to consider tonight. The other one would be to change the whole thing to commercial too. I think there's certainly value in respecting the property owner's request to have the zoning changed to I-1.
And he would have to come back and request an I1 then to the planning and zoning again then.
I'm sorry. I think there's value in changing the zoning on the neighboring property, the one next to IFA, to industrial 1, so that if they wanted, right, so that if they wanted to
I agree
do,
with you.
So he's expressed that to you. He's not necessarily here tonight, but he's
I don't know
expressed
if he's
that to
here,
you.
he may be here tonight.
Okay.
We've talked on the phone. I haven't met him that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So what's the, I assume the home was there before they rezoned that to I-2, right? You wouldn't be able to build a home on an industrial 2 zone
Or a commercial too,
or
so
a commercial
that matter,
2,
yeah.
so that home's been there for a while, I'd assume.
Yeah, it's been there since 1992, because I did the foundation.
Long time.
Doesn't look new. So,
I have a question, Dave. Are we
Yeah.
doing two different proposals tonight? Because the picture looks like one, it's all together. So are you proposing two IFA and the adjoining property, or what's the proposal tonight?
we've proposed that the zoning be changed on all of this from industrial 1 to commercial 2. So that's staff's proposal. The DRC recommended that that change be made. Subsequent to us making that proposal and sending public notices for this meeting tonight, we were contacted by this owner here, and it's my oversight that we didn't reach out to him to start with. I thought IFA owned everything. Poor assumption on my part. So I'm glad that he reached out and we were able to talk about this. Certainly you have the purview to make a different recommendation from staff. And I guess what I'm saying is that I think we're comfortable with that, particularly to change the zoning on that neighboring property to I-1. So does that make sense?
Kind of.
So we
Well,
have to make a recommendation back to staff for the I1?
No, I'm sorry.
Go
I'm
with the city
sorry.
council.
Two separate
Um,
proposals? One for IFA, one for the neighboring property?
You could look at it that way, in my
Or
mind.
do it all in one?
So, let's just say you would like to recommend that the council approve a zone change for the IFA property to be commercial 2 and the neighboring property to be industrial 1.
Which is the Randy Burnham property.
Or at Burnham, yes. You could make a motion just like that, and the city council would hear it in a couple of weeks, and they could decide what they want to do. It could be that simple, if that's what you want to do.
Or we could
Or you could-
recommend the same thing the staff has recommended.
Or that, or you could table it, or you could recommend that it be denied, of course, I mean, we've got
Okay.
all those.
But what about public notice to the I-1? That hasn't been made, right?
Yeah,
It's
that's a
public
great
notice to the
question.
commercial.
You have the ability to make recommendations that would modify a particular proposal. As long as, from a scope perspective, we've provided notice on the properties that are involved in the change,
Okay.
then that requirement for notice has been satisfied.
Okay, that is good
So
to
we
know.
don't need to
That's a
take a
question,
step
okay.
back procedurally or anything like that at all.
Okay. Good question. Okay. Yeah, I think we'll move into public hearing and get some input from the community. Thanks, Dave. Don't go too far, okay? Okay, we are in public hearing on the IFA zone change approval request.
Hi, my name's Jake Isaac. I got a couple
Hi, Jake.
questions for Dave. On the neighboring property, the Burnham residence there, what size is that property? Do you know approximately acreage?
We can get pretty precise.
I'm just curious to know that. Yeah. 1.51. Okay. And then as far as your conversation with Dirk, the manager at IFA goes, you know, he doesn't necessarily own that as far as I'm aware. Has there been any conversation at all with IFA corporate and letting them know that this change might take place, or somebody who might have more relevant concern about the zoning underneath of their business?
So when we send out notices, we send them to the address of record, and so that has been done.
Okay.
Well, but I think also important to that question, as I met with Mr. Nguyen, Dirk Nguyen, he seems certainly to understand the role that he played in IFA, and said that he would run it up, kind of the food chain there, and be back in touch if they had any concerns.
Okay. And approximately how long ago was this, you know, conversation with Dirk?
Close to a month.
Okay. Those are my only questions, I guess.
So Dirk is the store manager, is that right? Thanks, Jake. Anyone else from the public on the IFA?
What about the Burnham property?
Yeah, or the Burnham property, if there's definitely. Okay, we will move out of public hearing on AFA project or zone change. Well, we've heard from Dave on a couple of scenarios, actually 3 scenarios. Any other questions or discussion?
So, I'm clear, Dave, so if we change this to a C2, IFA can no longer manufacture or produce whatever it is, the fertilizer, or they still can, but it would be non-conforming?
They can continue to do what they're doing now perpetually,
Okay.
for as long as they would care to do that. If they expanded part of a non-conforming use, then that jeopardizes the non-conforming.
All of the use. So if they would do it-
Any part of it that is non-conforming then gets, I say jeopardized, it potentially is lost, the right to continue to do that.
Why is that? Why not just say you can't expand, but you can still do what you're doing? Why does it become?
That's a better way to say it, I think. You can't expand, but you can continue to do what you're doing.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. And there's some other provisions that come into play. For example, if they discontinued that fertilizer part of the business for some period of time, they would lose the right to be able to continue to do it.
What's that period of time? Because let's say they can only produce the fertilizer for 6 months of the year, and then that period of time is 6 months.
No, it's long.
It's a year.
It's at least a year.
And I think most communities take a pretty liberal view as to how you measure what discontinuing means and different things like that. I think it's very important, though, to note that, we certainly have no interest in doing anything to make IFA change. It's a landmark in the community in different ways. Again, it's a very important tie to part of what I think Spanish Fork really is. So if push came to shove, I think we'd talk about changing the zoning to something else, or maybe changing the text of a zone so that they could continue to operate as they are now for as long as they want. In this case, with what they're doing here, it seems really simple, though, that the commercial 2 works with that non-conforming use. And that's why we've made the recommendation that we have.
You had any complaints from neighboring residents about any of the things that take place at IFA? Any of the fertilizer being made, or noises, or anything like that?
Not that I'm aware of, none. In fact, I don't think they produce fertilizer there. I think they bring it on site, store it, and vend it in lesser quantities. It's that type of a thing. I didn't get the impression that that part of the business generates a great deal of traffic. I think it's more of a service that they provide to part of their clientele more than anything else.
So if they want to add on to their store or anything, they can still do that, though.
Absolutely, yeah, anything related to the retail.
C2 section.
I'd like to just say that I believe the interest of the city, Dave, in looking at some of these industrial zones, I-2 specifically, that we've found in certain pockets of the community, is to try to protect neighbors in the community from something going into an I-2 that just doesn't fit anymore, that maybe fit 30 years ago. And so by changing this to a C2 or even an I-1, keeps it from going from an IFA in 5 years to a salvage yard or something else that's approved, a crush plant, a cement plant. And so I think, and the reason I want to mention that is because the city's taken this approach, which I feel is in the best interest of the neighbors and the community, without affecting the business itself from operating from what it's doing right now. Is that safe to say, or fair to say? I'm hearing Brandon.
I've understood from conversations that we've had, certainly, that I
Okay.
think is exactly the motive.
Yeah. Okay.
Got another question?
Yeah.
So the city's kind of taken a step to try and clean up some zoning. The I-2, it sounds like specifically. We're looking at commercial 2 here, we're looking at the storage units, residential. I know another one's gonna be possibly R3 on Del Monte here in the future. What about this industrial zone? What's the city looked at as far as that property goes?
Yeah, honestly, I think we started with the easy ones, and just incrementally, we're getting to harder ones. From my perspective, it's really easy. You know, what I think is best for that. I know the property owner has a different opinion about what zoning's probably best for that site. The current general plan has that designated for low-density residential development. And that's where I would look for guidance relative to zoning and what might make the most sense. I don't know what we're going to suggest that you consider there, but we'll do that in the next few months, certainly, if not.
City have any vision for, I know there have been some complaints from residents about that building and different things, parents and whatnot. Does the city have any thoughts as far as talking to the owner and saying what's your plan with your property?
We've talked with the owner regularly for the better part of 20 years now, certainly for the last 15.
And is he happy with it as it is?
I think he is. I mean, the dialogue that we have had with him consistently has been about what's next. So in all candor, at this point in time, I'm to the point of kind of being beyond frustrated with just this talk about what's next, and not having seen any changes there. We have received applications, I have to go back a lot of years to this, but to have that property developed much like what has been proposed for the Sunrock property. 12,000 square foot lots for single-family homes. That's partly why our general plan for the property is what it is. You know, it matches that proposal that we received from the property owner some time ago. So I don't know what that future holds, and I think, as I've said, relative to the proposal that you're considering right now, we've talked with other property owners about it. By and large, we don't want to make existing businesses non-conforming. This, in my mind, is maybe the exception to where you would want to make this operation non-conforming. Cities do that because that is a way to start the process to extinguish a use. And again, we typically don't want to do that, but depending on what the appetite is to encourage a change there, that's one of the few tools that we might have. And even that, you know, would allow somebody to continue to operate, like I've said, as they are for well into the future.
So as long as, so if neighbors don't like it, if the city doesn't like it, as long as the property owner continues to do what he has done for years, he can do that.
Regardless of what the zoning is, if they don't change, we can't compel them to change. If
They own those property rights.
if the current use is legal, then they can do it forever.
But there would be some,
Change, that's it.
there would be some limitations, like you said, additions, growth,
Exactly.
expansions.
Yeah, so and what I think would cause this property owner concern, you know, I don't know how many tenants there are now, I know in that building, but I know it's more than one or two. As they come and go, our ability, for example, to issue a business license for an industrial business on property that's no longer zoned that way gets to be a challenge and probably would accelerate change and that type of thing. And that also is what I think will make a zone change process for that property more confrontational and challenging than not.
Yeah,
So,
okay, good to know,
Yeah.
good to know. Okay, good question, Kevin. Any other comments, questions about this? If not, I'm gonna ask you to make your motion if you're prepared to, one of you.
I'm not sure how I would do that, so do you have any ideas how you would do it?
I would,
Well, I'm concerned about the Burnham property.
yeah, if anything, I would say we just do IFA and leave that one out.
Right.
Table is it Burnham?
So would that go back to staff then?
Oh, we could-
Property, or would we?
If you want to change IFA to C2 and the Burnham property to I1, you can do that in a motion.
But what I'm
you
concerned
wanna
about
table
is
the
public, with the public knowing that that's what we're gonna do, and that hasn't been done.
No, the public's, I think,
For a
if I heard.
C2, for a
no,
C2,
but it
but
doesn't
not for an I1.
yet.
Public has notice of a zone change,
For the C2,
period, a zone change.
So when the public
but
is
if we wanna
given
change it-
notice, they're not given notice as to what the zone changes will be?
we typically do.
We typically do.
So-
The property owner has been notified, he has given his request. You can either follow it, if you table it, it's just coming right back to you guys.
There's no rush at the same time. If you feel more comfortable with us re-noticing it with a C2I1 component, I understand that, I appreciate it. Frankly, I see some value in that, if it's something you want to do. That's not a big hassle for us as staff. We'd have to notice it for, or we could, I guess we, honestly, we wouldn't have to, but we could notice it for another public hearing with
Right,
you,
I think we need to.
if that's what you want to do.
I think we need to.
I'm feeling the same way, Richard.
I feel like-
That's not hard for us at all.
Well, I'm ready to make this change then. How's that? Make the motion.
Let's do it.
I recommend that we approve, that we recommend the city council zone change of I2 to C2 for the IFA property and table the Randy Burnham property.
Okay, we got a motion, we have a second.
I'll second it.
Okay, motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. I didn't ask if any's opposed. Hearing none. Okay. So Dave, I heard you at the very first of this meeting that we was gonna delay, or what was your word on the Isaac?
Yeah,
What was the word you used? Was it delay?
just asking that be continued.
Continued? I gotta think we got some Isaacs here. I recognize at least one. We've seen Jake. I would like to probably hear them while they're here. You guys be all right with that?
Sure, they've been sitting here looking pretty, so we might as well
So-
listen to them.
We'll probably have to do a public hearing again, but if you guys would like to make comments since you came tonight and sit through this, if you'd like to, we'll go into public hearing and let you do that.
David Isaac, I'm the owner of the Leland Mill property. Just like to request that the commission deny the city the change of the zone. I feel that there's really no justification for doing so. We've never violated anything that we're aware of. We don't intend to. We were there a long, long time ago, before the city even came out there. And little bit by little bit, the city continues to change the neighborhood without any regard to the fact that we're there. Now all of a sudden, we're an industrial zone in the middle of a residential neighborhood, and that's not my fault. But it is my problem. And the city wants to sell the fact that that there is a problem, but if there's any problem, it's my problem. It's not the city's, because they want to change my zone. They've told us that changing the zone will not change what I do, and won't affect me. I'm sorry, but I don't know. I don't know why there's any justification in thinking that this needs to be done. It's always been an issue ever since we came into the city. I mean, a long time ago, and the city recognizes that we're out there. But anyway, I think it's one of those things you can just leave it alone. If there's a problem in the future, fix it then. But I don't see what the problem is. Anyway.
I'm Jake Isaac again, and just to give you guys a little context on our future plans for the business. I'm the fourth generation in the Isaac family to be a significant part of the business. My intention is to buy it from Dave and run it for at least the duration of my productive years. As far as any kind of imminent threat that the I-2 zone that we have will somehow in 5 years, like we talked about with IFA, result in a concrete batch plant or an asphalt production facility, a wrecking yard or something, the chances of that are just next to zero. Business is good. Intentions of expanding beyond what we do now. We like what we're doing. We have agreed to work with Dave and Brandon on what their proposed change is in terms of moving it to like an agriculture zone and then amending the agriculture ordinance in the zoning code of the city to more properly describe what we do there so that we don't end up in a non-conforming or grandfather situation. If, against our wishes, the city council decides to vote that through, and it does happen. And I want to be clear that our explicit expectation would be that every effort's made to turn over every rock and look under every bush and make sure that there's nothing at all that could, jeopardize our future use of that property or, our ability to rebuild something if it is damaged or burns down or whatever it is there. And so just out of goodwill, out of an effort to be cooperative, we've agreed to work with them on that, but we still intend to voice our opposition to it, to this commission and to the city council when the issue comes back up. So just so you know how our feelings are on that, it's a small property. We're 4.5 something acres there roughly. As far as any heavy industrial uses or I-2 uses that might really come in, I can't really see any possibility that this would be a valuable property for like a sunrock operation or, we have existing structures that are useful as warehouses and it would take a lot of retrofitting and demolition to change the use to something that would be really, I think, a nuisance and a danger to the neighborhood. And besides that fact, we plan on being there for 30 years. So, maybe this is a discussion we can have in 10 years from now again see where we're at as a family on what we intend to do with the business and whatnot, but I think for now, it's totally irrelevant. If we're gonna change the zone and get to a place where we're conforming anyway, then, you know, why, in my mind, do a strange experiment in agricultural/industrial zoning, and when we're the ones who may pay the price but receive no benefit at all from that change. We like where we're at, we'd like to stay there, so those are our feelings.
How long has your property been in the city?
Does anybody know when the city annexed that area there? It's been probably 20, 25 years. Yeah.
Annexed in as an I-2, so it's always been an I-2.
I'm not sure about that. Do you know about that? Was it annexed into the city as an I-2 property? Okay.
It's always been an I-2.
Yeah.
Probably the type of work that was being done at that time.
And still.
Classified it as an I-2.
Yeah, I mean, our manufacturing occurs outdoors, and there's some noise emittance and things that occur during, daylight hours only, during work hours.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure, because I don't have the experience in the zoning codes and whatnot that would separate us and upgrade us from an I-2 zone as opposed to an I-1 zone. But I would imagine that it's the outdoor storage and the outdoor manufacturing that occurs there, as well as the elevator and grain milling that occurs. So.
Well, Jake, thank you for your comments. Congratulations on 4 generations. That's accomplishment in any family business for sure. Appreciate your willingness to work with Brandon and Dave to, I sense that you can kind of see with what we're doing with some of those properties is trying to look out for the best interests of the community, and you've got property rights too that we got to watch over. And the fact that you're here and concerned about it, we recognize that and respect that. And so if we can come to a conclusion that works for both parties, great. If not, maybe we'll be back right where we are right now. So, but thank you for your input.
Okay, yeah, we'll be back probably, I think we'll have this issue worked out hopefully by next month's meeting and be able to kind of come back and talk about it again, so.
Okay.
Thanks for
Jake.
hearing us out.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Dan Davis, I'm the neighbor to the south of the mill.
Okay.
First of all, I went on the city's website to see what a I-2, and it's been a while, so forgive me if I got this wrong, what an I-2 zone allows. I understand the concern to limit some zoned areas so that you don't get undesirable businesses in there. And what's undesirable to one man is not to another. And so I'll just read off the list here. Automotive repair. Okay, somebody moves a pig farm in there and it stinks the whole area up. Nobody's going to like that, right? But I'm a local. This is like local situation. This isn't affecting anybody a mile away. Automotive repair, a car wash, like maybe Wiggy Wash, something like that. Contractor, warehouse, and storage yard. Don't know completely what that is, but could go either way. A financial institution, so that could be a bank mixed with a convenience store or a gas station or something like that, maybe, I suppose. An impound yard, get that. Nobody wants an impound yard in their backyard. But lube center. Sorry about my phone, I'm getting older. Lube center, lumber and building materials yard. If that were kept up, that wouldn't be bad. Oh, there you go. Municipal facilities required for local service. Wow, if you just localize all your services in one area, for example, businesses on the east side, everybody has to drive to that side of the town. It sort of smells like Envision Utah in the old days when they wanted to have everybody living in one spot and businesses in another spot, and you had to drive through the town to get to the businesses. Sometimes I think it's better if we mix some businesses with the residential, as long as they're not a troublemaking type business. And since
Mr. Davis, this is an I-1.
that's an I-1, so.
So you're,
Actually, this is
that's
I-2.
I-2.
This is I-2.
Yeah, so keep going. Office supply, Seems to be a decent business, offices, good business, outdoor display areas. What is that, a park? I don't know. Research, development, restaurant. What if Dave wanted to stop milling and stop doing that and start a restaurant? Surely, I mean, if somebody had the capital to put into that old building and fix it like they did the BYU schools in Provo, that would be, I mean, that would be a lot of money and it might be foolish, but it's still a thought. You know, there's a lot of history there. You know, you can see pictures of the mill building from back in the early 1900s, late 1800s, when they used to run the place off of water. Retail business, telecommunication. Okay, so you see it. Some of them are, most of them are acceptable businesses. And to take away his options kind of smells of constriction. It's sort of a, remember the old, was it last year we had that meeting about animal rights that was brought on sort of foolishly, and everybody was quite upset about it. You know, if you take away the animal rights, you take away the ability to have animals. Well, why have a hayfield? And if you can't have a hayfield or animals, why have greenbelt? And if you can't have greenbelt, your taxes go up, and all it is prime for development. It's sort of seemed like somebody was priming the situation for their objectives. And so I think Dave ought to have the right to call it, if he wants it to be I-1, that ought to be his call. Because all these businesses are legitimate businesses that are beneficial. And if everything's co-located to one specific location, I mean, okay, it's not a big deal to go across the town. But think of a guy that has to go 5 minutes to get to work. How many of you have to go 5 minutes to get to work or longer? Longer. What's your 15? That's still relatively short. My brother lives in Harriman. Just barely moved his offices. Downtown Salt Lake, 45 minutes. One way. So 2 hours he's away from his family per day. That means he doesn't get to see his little girls, his little boys, and all the things that are associated with raising a good family life. So what I'm getting at here is the time that is cumulatively wasted in driving is more valuable than people put a price tag on. So I think mixing things is not a bad idea, and I think Dave should have the right to call that, not somebody force it or sort of corral it or direct it based on their desires for outcomes. It should be his desire because he is the property owner. And as a resident in nearby location, I have no problem with what's going on over there. I don't complain about the noise. I don't complain about the dust. They've been nothing but the best neighbors I've ever. Actually, he's been the best neighbor I have. I've had all kinds of neighbors. The ones just south caused all kinds of troubles with us 10 years ago. Moved in from Salt Lake. I think Dave ought to be able to call this shot, nobody else.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Again, that was just an opportunity to let you guys talk, so appreciate you coming tonight. We'll have some more discussion on this, obviously, so this has been tabled to another meeting. Okay.
I'm an old dog, and Leland Mill's been here a lot longer than I have. It's been a good business, and so that's a good deal for you guys to go continue to talk with staff, and you be comfortable with how we're doing this. Right? You've been a good neighbor, Leland and Spanish Fork, good business people. We want you to be comfortable in how you're reacting. So we do want to table this and move it on. So you've got a chance to continue to talk with staff and till you feel good about this.
Okay. Okay, we're going to move on to number 6, general plan amendment, public hearing and zone change, public hearing for the bridges at River's Edge. Brandon, is this you or Dave?
I believe it was Dave.
Okay.
He's right there.
We were just talking about this, so there was a representative of the applicant here. He had to run to another meeting. And I don't really know how to put this. We had a DRC discussion last week about this proposal. The applicants didn't attend.
He did not
They
attend?
did not attend the meeting. An engineer that's worked for them was there on their behalf. He frankly, a very, very capable guy, but he wasn't prepared to speak to the applicant's motive. This is an application that was filed back before we started the River Bottoms vision process. This is partly why we felt like it was time to go through that kind of a process, and they reached out to Mrs. Brenneman in our office a month ago, maybe a little bit more than that, to resuscitate the application, and here we are. So the proposal is to change both the general plan and our zoning map. And some of you, I believe, were on the commission back when we received this proposal. I think we had a work session with the city council. And I may be getting some of this wrong, where we looked at some imagery and things like that these applicants had for how the property could be developed and used. And I think this proposal
They brought a
tonight,
brochure with all
Yeah.
of that, breaking down from higher density down to low density, going down by the river and stuff like that, so.
Yep.
Yep, it went right up to the state road.
it did, yeah. So they've represented in the past that they had the majority of the property on the south side of the river, up to the bluff, if you can picture that, over to Main Street under contract, and that they were planning for its future development. I've reached out to the applicants just in the last couple of days and understand that one of them's on vacation. One of the two parties that we've worked with closely is on vacation. The other one has another meeting someplace north of here. So I'll just, I guess, really be brief maybe in explaining our recommendation, because the proposal would require a general plan amendment, and that amendment's not consistent with what we've talked about as part of the River Bottoms vision plan. It's really hard for us to do anything but recommend that it be denied, and that's what the DRC's done. We've recommended that the general plan amendment be denied, and subsequently the zone change proposal as well. So that's our recommendation. We've noted a couple of our reasons, and they're broad. I think yet they're very significant. This particular area, incidentally, is in the 100-year floodplain. The south side of the Spanish Fork River, from the river all the way to the bluff,
It's floodplain.
is in that 100-year floodplain. So to kind of build upon what we touched on earlier, a concept that we're exploring is the idea of, again, recognizing that the folks that own property here, we think there's value in trying to help them realize some monetary value from development potential, yet we want to go through a process to where we can ensure that properties in the floodplain remain undeveloped. So this could be what we would call a sending zone, to where a certain number of property rights would be assigned to properties in this area, and those could be sold to developers to utilize elsewhere. So no development here would result in some amount of increased density someplace else in the community.
What do they call that again? What's the term for that?
Transferable development rights,
TDR? Okay.
TDRs, yeah.
Okay.
And incidentally, there are communities in Utah that have used that mechanism well. Mapleton
We used
is
it up
one.
on Legacy Farms.
Kind of, yeah, kind of in a certain sense there. So
Okay,
that's again, that's our recommendation.
that's a recommendation. We don't have anyone to represent them here.
I will represent that, but if I own property,
Okay, got a representative.
Okay,
I have some.
okay. This is a public hearing.
Let
Well,
him-
yeah, this
can
isn't
talk
public, so
first, so-
we'll let the developer talk, yes.
You can put me in the public hearing.
No,
This
no,
portion.
you're right to come on up here. What was your name again?
My name is Alan Bird.
Okay,
I have been a resident of Spanish Fork for 5 years when I lived in Wolf Hollow, but then I moved back to Springville. but I have been a landowner in Spanish Fork for over 20 years. We bought this property in question that's the subject of this hearing tonight in 1999, nearly 20 years ago. And we bought it to be developed. During that 20-year interlude, we've met many times with Spanish Fork City, with the council, with the mayor, with the city manager, with Dave Euler. I don't know, is that related to you?
Very closely.
Very closely.
Know him a little bit.
And Dave often told us that he believed that there would be a higher density down along Highway 189 and lower density as we went east on the property. And this is what this bit of history I thought was important to get before the Planning Commission, because it seems like, in our opinion, we've been being put off by the Planning Commission, not by the Planning Commission, but by the Planning Department. Because like was said, this proposal was made just almost 2 years ago, and there was no answer ever given. It was not rejected, it was not taken, it was just sat, and it died. And by council, we were told that we should put it back on, because in the general plan of Spanish Fork City, it does allow for a 10 to 12 acre piece for mid-density in that location. And we haven't really heard about that. And I know that Dave has worked on this Vision property, and we've been to at least a half a dozen or a dozen meetings with Vision and Simpson, and you can only go on so long, and that's what I think is disheartening for the developer. He's spent a lot of money so far, and I financed a lot of that, but he still put out several $100,000 waiting to get an answer. About 5 years ago, I got a call from Spanish Fork City from the staff. They told me they needed to talk to me because they needed help with a problem they had with the Bureau of Land. I don't want to say the wrong name here. Army Corps of Engineers. The Army Corps of Engineers. And that they had a water reclamation problem. And they wanted to know if they could buy 7 acres of our ground that was immediately adjacent to 189. Of course, I think I talked with Chris, is it Chris Bishop over engineering?
Chris Thompson.
Chris Thompson was over engineering. I met with him several times. And I told Chris, I says, Chris, our concern is if we sell the city that front acreage, that's a gateway to our property. And we've been told many times by members of the Spanish Fork City Council and the mayor and elected officials that that is going to be the crown jewel of Spanish Fork. I think you've heard that called that before. And I said, so we're very concerned of what you're going to do with that 7 acres, how you're going to develop it. Is it going to be presentable? Is it really going to be something that, excuse me, I can't hear you very well, I'm deaf. Well, I am deaf, so. So anyway, we were quite concerned about that, and I said, I don't want to sell you this property and have it turn into a marsh with bulrushes and just be a hibernating place for, an incubation place for mosquitoes. And they says, oh, it won't happen that way. And I says, well, I'd like to see something. So in the negotiation with Spanish Fork City, they hired a land planner and an engineer. I thought it would be interesting for you to see this document. It oftentimes isn't shown as we show the vision document. So this is the document that was paid for and produced by Spanish Fork City administration. You'll notice that that's a pond, and there's housing all the way around that pond. And it's a multifamily type of housing. And so that was one of the concerns we had, and we were told that there would, and in the document, it's a 27-page sales document with Spanish Fork City. It says that they will never let moss build up on the pond, and that they will not let it become a place where mosquitoes are created and just a marshy area, that it will be a park, recreation, wetlands area. And we don't think that's really happened to us there. And then the second question that we had about selling them that 7 acres is how do we get to the other 140 acres that we own that's immediately east of that? We recognize there's floodplain, and we recognize we have to, if we build in that area, we have to meet the requirements of floodplain, and that can be done. But the decision was made that the way that we develop the balance of the area is that the city provide us 2 pipes going under Spanish Fork River and coming up onto the property back to the east, and that we use a siphon rather than a pump, and we take all sewage over and across that way, and we paid Spanish Fork City $80,000 for them to go ahead and put two pipes under Spanish Fork River. And now Dave comes in and says, oh, well, we'll have maybe 1 unit per 50 acres. The cows won't fill up our siphon. We spent $80,000 for something that was not there. And so I think that Spanish Fork City made some recommendations and some promises and gave us some ideas as to what would happen with this property. And we believe that there's our ways to develop the property and meet the needs of the city and also meet the needs of the property. The group that's that's looking at developing the property has got the wherewithal to do that. We can meet those responsibilities, and we think, and the reason they're not here is that their comment was, as well, Spanish Fork City's just gonna turn it down. That's all they've done for the last 2.5 years. When the comments said when Simpson and Logan, and we'd go to talk to Simpson and Logan, and they'd say, hey, we've been told by Spanish Fork City not to talk to you guys. So we feel like we've really been given.
Who is Simpson and Logan?
That's the ones that made the.
They're the ones that put together this program. And you know, I understand moratoriums, I understand where cities have to pull back and evaluate what they're doing with their city and what meets the needs. But 2 years is, in my opinion, is about as long as I've ever heard. And now we're talking about going in for more public hearing. We've been having public hearings for almost 2 years, haven't we, Dave?
This is the first public hearing we've had on this request.
Yes.
First one.
What did we call it down at the fairgrounds when we met?
We've had a lot of meetings. This is the first public hearing we've had on this request.
So this is a legal technicality that this is the first public.
This is,
The proposal.
I've been on the commission for multiple years. This is the first time I've seen this plan.
Yeah,
Well-
you came in and, you came in with that plan that first time.
And we were told that we couldn't get an answer because it was going to go through public hearing and it was a moratorium. And I mean, the waiting period, if any of you have been contractors, you know what it does to make them wait for 6 months when you wait for over 2 years. And now they're still saying, hey, it's still in moratorium. We think that that the request that we're making does meet the current zone. And that's why we're requesting that and feel like we've worked in good faith with Spanish Fork City, but Spanish Fork City has not worked in good faith with us. And so anyway, please keep that in mind as you go forward.
Alan, can I ask a question? Will you use the pointer over there and show me what property you own on here?
Okay, our property, there's about 29 acres that goes right up into this area here,
You have 29 there.
29 here, and then there's 108 that go back from the Barkay property going back. So, and I think 29 is the correct acreage. I'm getting old and I forget.
So you own property in the city and in the county?
We own property in the city and in the county. If this is, that's a highway there. See, this is the 7.5 or 7.1 acres that we sold to the city. We own this strip here. In fact, in the sales agreement with Spanish Fork City, we with the city jointly developed this as a collector road so that we can use it for the people coming down out of whatever is built in this area here. And in fact, Spanish Fork City had made the commitment that they would approach UDOT and make the request for this access, and that we would share costs on this through the 7.1 acres. So we own that piece, and then we own this piece right here. Oh, let's move that. There's a little piece right here that is owned, and then over to this area here. I actually run and control this piece of property here for Lynn Robbins, and then a brother-in-law owns this 24 acres here. Barkay owns this strip that comes through here, and then the next 118 acres is property that we purchased from Paul Pryor.
And
I know that we've been meeting with Steve Wilson and some other landowners looking at possibilities of trying to annex into Utah County so that we could look at 5-acre ranchettes for horses or do something. We've got such little help from Spanish Fork City. We've actually approached and met with each of the commissioners at the county, asking them. And of course, their opinion is they want to do something that's in harmony with the city, which is pretty standard. And I just think that there are some things that we could do to meet the recommendations of Logan Simpson and be beneficial for the city and beneficial for us, and still get something out of the land and the property that we've got there.
So property owner that's in the county can annex into a city
Yes.
and then approach the county again and annex back into the county?
I don't really like that. That doesn't happen
But that
very
is
often.
possible?
I've never heard
County
of that
is-
happening, to be honest with you.
Which would put them back in the county.
Doesn't happen.
Yeah, I don't, I've never heard of that happening if it can.
What's the city boundary? Just that pond?
The city's property is this area right here.
So that's annexed into the city.
And that's, and the annexation of the city actually comes across like this and down
Okay.
like this,
Okay.
and then up like this. So
Okay.
that's the city annex property.
Where's
This
the,
is all in the county here.
where's the agreement line with Salem City?
Declaration's clear over this along that south highway, right there, yeah.
That red dot.
Where it turns on the light.
Okay. Is there any possibility that Salem would not want to keep that and try and move further north and get some of these properties annexed into Salem?
That land right now is not in Salem's annexation policy plan. They could amend it. They could amend it to include lands that are in our policy plan, so yeah, that's possible. Honestly, I don't think that's a realistic scenario.
We changed our declaration line, what's been, a year? Just that one little spot, and gave it over to Salem
Yeah.
and run it along the road, if you can remember that. I think you were in there then, and gave them that one little spot for declaration. Other than that, it follows that road that sits there. And that's our declaration.
There is a great history to this piece of property. There is a 27-page sales agreement between myself and Spanish Fork City, and there's some commitments that Spanish Fork City has made in that 27-page sales agreement that they really ought to stand up to, just out of integrity and honor. And I think they're dodging that. There's a lot of things that need to come together, and as a result, it's hurting me as a landowner. It's hurting them as a land developer. Like I say, to spend nearly 3.5, 4 years trying to get a property to the point that you can get an answer is really quite an unusual situation.
Do you own any property north of the river, or is it all south?
Everything that we own is south of the river. I have some property that we used to own on the north end of town, but not any longer.
Dave, can you remember, I can't remember with Chris Thompson on what our agreement was once they built that pond, you know, when we, Cold Springs. I mean, that was coming from the.
That was the one at Cold Springs,
Yeah,
and they
and we-
needed the clay from this
That's right.
property to take up to Cold Springs.
So there was an agreement with you guys, and I can't remember what it was. Can you remember what it was?
No,
So-
I know what
I-
I think is the most important part of the agreement.
Okay.
The city, and it was our Public Works Department apparently orchestrated an agreement to either pay for the property that was used for the wetland pond, or to allow for a certain amount of development on the land that's in the city.
Let it
And
serve as
sometime
open space.
last year, we paid for the land, and it's our legal counsel that's told me that that was the obligation that we had. I think it was in excess of $600,000 that we paid somebody. I don't know if it was Mr. Bird or Blue
Paid
Ox
that
or
to me.
who, but that check was written,
670.
and the obligation, again, I understand from our legal department.
So that takes our legal obligations away from whatever the agreement
No,
was.
it doesn't. The contract is very specific that we can either sell them the ground or we can trade it for open space.
That's right.
I mean, we
Sell
have
the
one of
stick
those two
around,
options.
Or they get something else. They
And,
sold
and
us
Dave,
around.
and Dave told the
Paid for it.
developer that it would be a cold day in you-know-where before they would ever trade it for future developments. And so the developer saw no point in holding on to the property, but it did not affect, and specifically does not affect, the rights that we have under the contract. And if we want to take, and I think that's where, kind of where the developer looks, and I disagree with that, because I think we have honorable people that we deal with, and we've been dealing with them for many years, and I think something that's fair needs to be worked out, because it does not affect any of the rights of the sales agreement, other than the fact that the cash comes over, and the city wanted to pay the cash.
Well,
You can smile, but that's true. Dave.
So, Mr. Byrd, as a planning commission, we don't know any of this legal stuff, and so it's hard for us to make a judgment and approve something like this without, you know, getting all the facts and everything out, so we
I
can make the right
understand.
decision, and so.
And tabling it would probably be a much wiser situation than to.
Well, it'd be better for us just to deny it right now and then let you guys work out your legal aspects. You know, when I was on the city council, and I can talk about, like, Legacy Farms is a good example. I remember having the developers come in and talking, and I was the city councilman that worked with that, and we had monthly meetings, working things and trying to work things out and getting things put in positions. I mean, I can see this right now, and you've got an R4 in here now that wasn't in there a year ago or 2 years ago when you brought that presentation. So that's a different zone change than what you presented to us, you know, in your presentation a long time ago. So you've made some different changes here now and what you had before. So, but legally, gee, we can't make that decision yet until we know where all the tie-ins are. And so I would suggest that we're you know, I'm gonna deny this, you know, say deny, but let you guys get together and put your feet under a table, put the boots under a table, and start talking and getting things worked out where what's legal and what isn't, right, you know, anyway, what's in the contract, what isn't, because right now we cannot make, you know, we just can't, God, there's just no way. Thanks.
Thanks, Alan. Let's move into public hearing and see if there's anyone else that wants to comment on this. Okay, seeing none, we'll move out of public hearing. Yeah, a lot of information I just heard that I don't feel comfortable without at least hearing from the city side of it, and I don't know that the city wants to represent now.
Oh, absolutely. Very, very comfortable representing a lot of things.
Okay, that would help us.
Okay. What you see right now is the city's general plan for the area that we've talked about. It hasn't changed in a really long time. The city's never contemplated having development of any significance in this area. Mr. Byrd mentioned 50-acre minimum lot sizes. The designation that we have here is actually 40. It would lend itself to an exclusively agricultural zone with a minimum lot size of 40 acres. If anybody has been told that there's no sense of urgency to act on an application to propose to change this, it's because there hasn't been an appetite to do that at all. Either here or elsewhere in the river bottoms, where we absolutely have had people approach us about the prospect of annexing and zoning for something other than agricultural uses. Developers speculate on land all the time. That's just, there absolutely is an aspect of that that potentially is very lucrative. And many of the folks that Brandon and Kim and I talk to in our office are looking to do that. In this case, I absolutely think that somebody in a very speculative way has made an investment in land that, first of all, is not in a city. That's really going out on a limb, where you're anticipating annexation. You're counting on that to be able to realize some type of financial gain. that the city has said they want left for agricultural uses. I mean, that's a pretty significant strike too, to rely on your ability to somehow talk a city into changing a general plan and therefore getting zoning that accommodates some kind of development that you're interested in too. Does it happen? You bet. But is it a challenge? And do most of the folks that we work with shy away from that kind of risk? Absolutely. And the last thing, every square inch of property that we're talking about is in the floodplain. All of it. So without working with the federal government to have floodplain maps revised and to do different things like that, you know, you have another really significant strike that says the property can be used agriculturally, but that's just about it. I'm not aware of anybody with Spanish Fork City that's ever approached any of these property owners about annexing and developing. I don't think anybody has encouraged that. We certainly have fielded request after request after request to do so, which has led to the process that we talked about earlier tonight. And I'm certainly here to speak to the integrity of that process that we went through, where we didn't limit the input that was received just from, you know, a select group of property owners or people with development interests. And I think it's very important that that vision that we're working with now be respected. And I'll just leave it at that, you know, relative to kind of the land use side of the change. When it comes to the contract and those sorts of things, I know that I've talked to legal counsel that's investigated on behalf of the applicant, you know, whether or not the city has fulfilled its commitment relative to purchasing the land for the wetlands that were constructed. And the folks that I've talked to, again, not representing the city, but the other side, they've been very candid about expressing that they feel like we've done what we needed to do. So again, those are things I'm very, very comfortable speaking to. If you want to take more time with this, I'm very, very comfortable with that as well. But I don't think you'll hear anything different from anybody on staff if we talk about it more.
Can you address this real quick, the Butler Springs? The residential that's displayed in this image, is this a presentation put together by the people that designed and put in the wetlands, or is this something the city actually had some say in?
Actually put together by Spanish Fork City. Person that put it together was not northern engineering, but landscape. They were hired by Spanish Fork City.
Yeah, that I don't know. I know that the imagery that you've seen that was provided by Blue Ox, that was Northland. That group of landscape architects, they're the ones that put that together.
Is that what we got that a year ago?
You called it a packet. Yeah, that was Northland. They do great work. But that's all I know about this. I don't know that I've seen this before.
So this 27-page sales contract that Mr. Bird feels like we've got some integrity issues representing our end of a contract. Can you speak to that? Or did you just speak to that?
Again, frankly, I think that had we misstepped or had we failed to do everything that we had been obligated to do, and incidentally, we didn't fulfill our obligations in a grudgingly way or anything like that. I think when we were asked to write out a check, we wrote out the check and made what, again, I think was a significant payment. So, yeah, and clearly, you know me, I'm not the city's legal counsel. I didn't write the contract, didn't really have anything to do with this. Unfortunately, I can't escape some meetings, though. I say maybe sometimes it's unfortunate that I can't escape meetings where things like this get discussed. So I've heard firsthand quite a bit about the city's position relative to that contract.
So, Richard, Commissioner Davis mentioned, you know, not feeling comfortable, especially what we've heard tonight, and that if we denied it, he kind of advised him, if we've overstepped, the city's overstepped, get together and talk about it and work it out. But it's making it a tough decision for us, not knowing the depth.
Well,
stuff.
I understand that, and I'm not wanting at all to overstep my bounds here relative to suggesting what your role is, but just simply in terms of the land use question as to whether or not the general plan should be changed and the zoning changed, I don't think the contract really has anything to do with that. So if you chose
I see.
to make that your, maybe scope on this or purview, I think that's perfectly appropriate.
We have a general plan that we have laid out for the river bottoms, and now here we have the river bottoms vision coming up, and with all the other legal aspects that are involved in this, gee, I just don't feel comfortable at all even thinking about making a zone change in something, changing our general plan. I'm just, right now, until you guys iron that out and we look at that stuff, I can't help it,
That seems odd that we would create zones. I mean, the general plan, I understand, that's a vision, right, of the whole thing. But why would you create zones for property that the city doesn't even control? Does that make sense? So this has zones, and the proposal is to change a zone that's not even in the city.
This portion is.
Oh, okay, that's right, there's a piece of it. Okay,
You're absolutely right.
okay,
Outside of Spanish Fork city boundaries, we have no zoning jurisdiction, so it's.
Okay.
More than likely, if this were to get approved and changed, they would then take their additional property and try and annex it in. And do another zone change.
And the other things that Dave mentioned is definitely our floodplain. I mean, good heck.
That's the issue.
That's a big issue, and there's a lot of legal aspects involved in that could really hurt us down the line, especially if we let any building and that's happened a little bit back in our past where we ended up, engineers told us one thing and they were wrong, and we ended up having to build berms and everything else to protect those houses, and we surely don't want to get into that again.
right,
Don't want to look like the
No,
Bahamas.
and so
the Bahamas.
the bottom line is that there's just too many things right now that's not right with this. So I'm feeling we need to deny this until things have been worked out and all those aspects worked in. River bottom vision, floodplains, our general plan on how we've looked at that and work all that in. And that needs to be done by the developers and the staff and everybody else too.
Okay, we've had our public hearing on this. Commissioner Argyle, did you have any comments on this?
I feel the same way as
Okay.
Commissioner Davis.
Okay. So I think we've heard from everyone. I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we recommend City Council the denial of the general plan amendment and zone change for the bridges at River's Edge.
A motion, we hear a second?
I'll second.
And all in favor, say aye.
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 Okay. We're all the way through 6A. We're down to 7, which is Title 15 amendments. And then we've got,
You mind if we do that?
what?
Jump to the last
Sure.
discussion item and come back to Title
The
15.
other business, Legacy Farms?
Yeah.
Okay?
The proposal's pretty simple. There's an area, a part of Legacy Farms where the developers would like to add a swimming pool. It's not a big pool. We'll look at some aspects of it here in a minute. And the pool would be located on what then ends up looking like a lot, would be a lot. In fact, Mike, let's just get right. Even if we just have like a, kind of the lot layout. They want to add a swimming pool, they don't want to add homes, but when they create a lot for the pool, a number of lots become smaller. 15 lots, 17 lots, something like that, become smaller. We'll be able to look at that in a second. In order to create this lots. The pool, as I understand it, would be available for kind of like a subset of the overall Legacy Farms community, people that would be part of just one neighborhood, HOA,
72 lots.
72 homes. They're in that neighborhood. And we've talked about this in the DRC meeting with Mrs. Smith representing Fieldstone Homes. And kind of had two different opinions on the part of staff. Some people felt like, hey, it's adding a swimming pool. That's definitely an amenity. That's a good thing for the neighborhood. Go for it. And other folks were very hesitant by way of, hey, the lots in Legacy Farms are already pretty small, and shrinking a number of the lots down to create space for this pool, even though that wouldn't result in more homes being constructed, that was viewed as a negative. So when we couldn't reach some kind of consensus, we decided that it was appropriate just to let the Planning Commission and City Council weigh in. So
So
that's,
density's not changing, they're not putting more houses, they've shrunk some lots to accommodate the pool.
well said. Yep.
So who gets to use the pool?
These 72 homeowners, or I'd assume they're guests, something like that.
They will be paying HOA fees to get pools.
Okay, that's what.
Is it a,
It's
is it
an
a
HOA,
designated
then I can
area, like a
understand that.
fenced
If
part
it's
of the
not,
community?
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, tell us more.
We might just have to go with the hard copy too,
Okay.
so I can,
So this is what we call C10, 11, 12, and 13. C10 just barely got approved.
So it's this chunk
yes.
or the whole
Can you
thing?
bring up
What plat is it?
C10, just got approved?
This area,
Yeah.
72 homes right here.
Thank you.
Okay,
These are the lots that would get modified to make space for that.
okay.
Still fit within guidelines for the zoning that they have then, right?
And we'll talk more about that, maybe just what you could put
Oh,
on those
good.
lots.
Okay. So they,
That's an HOA, that's an HOA area.
This is that
Yeah.
lot, right, but isn't
yes,
this?
yeah, it's all that area right there. So if you come, it's all preliminary, it's part of all of Legacy. Yeah.
Pool.
Yeah, so actually, the 72 lots will go here, up, and over, like that. And this plat right here just barely got final plat approval because those lots will not be changing in size at all. So the lots affected go from this corner lot to here. And actually, these lots here got larger, so we have 6 larger lots because we decreased the size of this corner lot. That'll be a pool lot. And 7 lots along here got smaller. So 6 got bigger and 7 got smaller. And the reason why we couldn't carry it on further is there's a sewer line that runs straight down there. So we couldn't affect lots on either side. So that's written in gold, and the one down here is written in gold. So we could only work within here and here. So the density or the number of lots did not change. We feel like all we're doing is increasing the open space area, and there will be CCNRs on it, and I think the fee, they calculated to be about $70 a month for HOA fees to maintain the pool. Will you show what we're proposing? Did you get it? Yeah. So on that one lot, we're gonna have, now, talking to staff, this lot, or this parking space will probably become a handicap because that is too close to the corner. So we'll lose one space there and make it a handicap. We'll have a fenced area for the swimming pool. And then next, sorry. And then on the other side, we're gonna have a little park area with swings. The improvement cost for this will be about $250,000 for the pool, and this will just be 2 restrooms here. And with a lot, it'll be about a $350,000 cost to Fieldstone in order to build this amenity. And this, of course, anybody can play on it and use it as a neighborhood park.
Is it the intent of Fieldstone to build the homes on the lots as well as the clubhouse? Or do you know if those will be sold?
Go what?
Will Fieldstone be the builder?
Yeah, Fieldstone will be the builder on the 72 lots.
As well as the pool?
As well as the clubhouse, yes. So this is kind of something new for Fieldstone. This will be their 3rd PUD, if you want to call it, with a clubhouse. And it's worked well in their other 2 communities, so they wanted to do it here. I think one of the problems when we went to DRC is, well, one of the things they wanted us to come back with is on here, find out how many lots were actually going to be smaller and how many were larger. And LAI came up with that, and that was that. I thought that was in your packet. I'm sorry if it didn't get out. Any
As far as
questions?
lot size meeting the Legacy Farms vision plan agreement, is there any problem there, Dave?
Can you talk to that, Julie? Just
Yeah,
kinda
there are
what the minimum-
these here are 67 feet wide, and I think these are existing 67 right here. So on that, I think they have a 3-car. We submitted plans to DRC showing what homes fit on those. And I believe there's a 3-car garage that fits on theirs, and then they had several 2-car garages showing the offsets on those lots and what homes would fit on those.
So how does that tie in, your answer to my question?
So how Legacy Farm fit or works is depending on the size of the lot, depends on how many corners you have to have, and this definitely fits in the standards for Legacy Farms.
And I think from our perspective, more importantly, you still have a number of opportunities. The colors on this, what do those mean?
The yellow ones are larger, so these lots increased in size and the orange decreased.
Okay, and yet you could still have a 3rd-car garage on how many of these?
On 1, 2, 4, 7, 8, 9.
So out of 17, how many lots are we looking at there?
Oh,
That are
7.
impacted? Is it more than that?
No, well, that are impacted or just as all together?
That'd be modified.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. All 16. Yeah, because the 3 here that have been well, I'm counting. So I got 7 and
You're counting
6, those
those.
stay the
Right.
same. So 13 lots have been modified
Okay, and you could still do 3-car garages on
on all of them.
all of them, which for us is kind of the key. If you're still able to fit, and I shouldn't say us, for me, that's kind of a big deal. If you can still put what, for Fieldstone's one of their bigger homes, bigger particularly in terms of width, and have a 3rd-car garage on it,
And still meet the setbacks?
and still meet all of the other criteria, and have a swimming pool added to the neighborhood, I'm pretty comfortable with it. That's just me.
Okay.
So $70 a month is
That's what we came up with.
how much would be the HOA fees without the pool?
There is none. It would just be a standard subdivision.
So are there any homes currently built that people are living in?
No,
So there's nobody that's living there now that bought in,
no,
not being in
you can't do
HOA?
that. You can't add something on that's already been
That would be my
purchased.
only concern.
Yeah.
Houses are in this area here.
And they would be
Okay.
part of that HOA?
They are not.
The area would be this spot here.
So,
And we just have this submittal for this.
Yeah, so that's part of
It's
it.
kind of working its way up.
Yeah, so it goes
Oh, sorry. it
like
includes
that,
these.
yeah. So it's those lots right there that will be part of the HOA.
so if it's an HOA, who takes care of the roads then?
there's only, there's still public roads.
Public streets. and-
They're only being charged for the maintenance of that lot.
So they deal with their own landscaping, mowing their own lawns.
Owns garbage, own cable.
Gar-
you know.
Everything but a pool. You are only paying for a pool.
Yes, sir.
That would be an HOA, you know. Yeah. Something in an HOA and they're not always pleasant, but if it's just for a pool, I
Seems kind of,
I would use
it's
it.
not very clear, it's not clear at all to look at that and say, oh, that swimming pool's for these people, at all. You know what I mean? I was almost seeing it, I was thinking about.
Well, you have a key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I don't know, just kind of seemed odd that you could have.
It's not more clearly defined.
Yeah, it's not more clearly defined. I can think of one place where there's a pool up by the Oaks that's east of the Canyon View, not east, south. And you see that pool sitting there, and I don't know, I guess my assumption is everybody in that area is part of that, which is quite clearly defined. Because if that's the case, that's true. Maybe it's only 6 neighbors.
Never thought,
Yeah. That's kind of an example, that's kind of an example of this, isn't
The
it?
orangey color, it's only the orange color brick ones up there, not anything farther up the road.
Oh, really? Okay.
If you're a house right across the street,
Pull
it's
that- pull
not
that
in the HOA, but you're good friends with
That's
somebody
the
over
key,
here.
right? You gotta know somebody.
That's like sharing Wi-Fi or something, you have to have everyone kind of join in. You pay off my HOA, you get in the pool. I don't know.
Can you buy into the HOA?
If you live down in the city?
So as long as the fees are up front before people buy the home and they know what they're paying into, that's my only concern really. Whether they choose to pay that $70 a month on top of their mortgage, that's their choice, but as long as they have that choice.
And where we got our numbers from is from Jason Suker, who runs what is it called? The people that take care of the HOAs. So they manage, thank you, it's a HOA management company, and that's where we got our numbers from.
That's the swimming pool
Yeah.
section.
Anybody know how that works? Is it everybody around there or just a few?
That first group of
Colors plus one, I think. So that one, but not those.
Oh, so it's more the color of the brick, color of the construction.
Yeah, except for this one that was already existing when they built
Mm.
all these other ones. My parents-in-law live right there, so I didn't know that.
He goes up there and swims. That's why he's so tan.
We have to pay half the HOA. No, I'm just kidding.
All right.
So does Brian and Susan get to use that then? Do they?
Let's see, that
So
is,
color brick plus that one is how they define it.
it's not a
But
public
I
hearing.
See what you're saying with that one.
So really, I don't think there's necessarily formal action, but if you guys really, really object,
Oh,
it'd be great to hear that.
no objection.
I think that's the best.
Thank you for your
we can
time.
get Tonight, yeah.
Okay.
City council.
Okay. I know these folks didn't stick around for the Title 15.
It's part, it's exciting.
Did we cover your needs?
Really gets good, right?
No, I wanted to make sure that unmitigated nightmare called HOA didn't have anything to do with me, we lived in legacy farms already.
Okay.
So I assume it's not going to, right?
No, it's only those lots.
Unbuilt, just a preliminary plat, there's not a final, there's only a final for these ones, but yeah, it's in the field right now.
That's what I wanted to make sure.
The gift that keeps on giving.
I think we can, well, I don't know if we can do it. You're the man. Well, it's because you've been tagging.
Good luck out in your car.
Hey,
While you're still here.
No,
I seem like a good jogging partner.
he had to go to ambulance.
Oh, did he?
Mind if we go kind of quick?
Yeah, please.
You've done pretty good tonight.
You've done great.
Reader's Digest would be wonderful.
Oh, she had a question.
Are we done?
Yeah.
It'll be, that will be on the city council agenda on the 17th, though, so. 2 weeks
What's
from
that?
now.
This same thing you mean? Oh,
the proposal that you.
Mr. Bird was here for? Okay.
And the city attorney and public works director will be here to speak for themselves, so.
Good. That'll be good.
Might have to come to that one in person.
Just watch it.
Hey, we're gonna expect you to get up and to give some comments next time.
I think this is similar to what maybe I've said before. This is largely just trying to improve clarity.
We just have,
Yep, I think we're getting there. With a few substantive things, so I'll try to focus more on the substantive parts. And I'll just really kind of try to blast through the,
Like some artists. They go with the DRC.
oh yeah, you know what?
Yeah, we'll be on the DRC agenda.
It is.
I think Jason has a +1 to this.
Which we've actually made.
Oh, it's the.
Junior got me this last week.
Did make it.
So it's in,
This is the DRC one.
yeah, it's in my
It's in
edition.
your stuff. Okay.
We'll have to work through some kinks that way. This is because we define a billboard elsewhere. This is to try to clarify things and to make it more consistent with what the building code says. And that's kind of the same here now, relative to defining a building. We had some discussion on this in the DRC meeting. Since then, I'll mention this a handful of times as we go through this. The city attorney, the building official, and I got together, and now our recommendation is that for the definition of a building, we simply say a structure. And then when we get to structure, that's more clearly defined. As strange as it is, sometimes we disagree with people about what a building is or is not. And usually that's relative to like a setback question or a
That way,
RV question.
do you need to
right?
define what the building's, I mean, structure is for, whether it's humans or animals or?
Could. In most
Water sector
cases,
tried to
we're just
define
trying to say it's a, for whatever purpose, it's a structure. So, a couple of changes on that page. Again, for me, that's more for the sake of clarifying. Then down onto page 4, we've got a couple more. Actually have a typo here. This should not be struck out. So this should read a building designed for 2 single-family homes living independently of each other on the same lot. Should not be struck out. One thing that we're doing with this addition, and honestly, it's just because we talk in terms of units a lot. And I think sometimes we sort of lose touch that they're really not units. These are homes. These are neighborhoods. These are places where people are maybe going to spend some of the most important parts of their lives. So where we've referred to things as units before, we're just swapping that out categorically with homes. And the find and replace for that is a little bit cumbersome in words, so that's why it kind of ends up being noted that way. But you'll see us talking less and less in that context of referring
Okay.
things as home, as units more as
Nice
homes.
change.
Then down onto the definition of a corner lot on page 7. This has to do with setbacks. That's really where this becomes important. This, I think, is largely authored by Mr. Snyder, and I simply think it's more clear relative to what we're using as the basis for identifying the required setbacks. I think this is probably mostly consistent with how you'd see it written in some other communities. On page 9, we have a change relative to an outdoor storage area, just to clarify that it is what it is, whether it's associated with a business that's on that property or not. Again, that's from some experience that we've had. Then on page 12, the definition of a structure, like I said earlier, We've actually expanded this in light of the discussion I mentioned earlier, to where we're suggesting that it read, anything built, placed, or constructed on a parcel of land, including but not limited to portable buildings or storage containers. Just kind of relative to contemporary popular trends. People buying a storage container and using it as an accessory building, for example. That's pretty popular, and I think they work great, and we don't see a problem with them. But in as much as really they're being used as accessory buildings, we've required that they meet certain setback requirements from time to time and things like that. And this just sort of clarifies that approach that we've taken. Again, just kind of focusing on things that have a little bit of substance to them. On page 16, we have sort of a clerical thing that it pertains to the application process. I don't really want to spend a lot of time on that, but we'll mention that going back now 6 or 7 years ago, we switched over from what now is old-fashioned, the paper application procedure, to where everything that people submitted was a hard copy, to going to where everything that was submitted was a digital copy of some kind. And we still have some remnants in the ordinance to where we're referring almost more to hard copy than digital. So Kim's worked to try to help us get that stamped out. This concept here is replicated with a number of different applications that we'll talk about. Just the idea that applications that somebody makes and the city doesn't act upon, they do have an expiration date of some kind. One of the processes that we deal with that typically takes the longest is a general plan amendment, whether it's to change the text or the map. So 24 months, in my opinion, is good. It's good to give somebody a full couple of years to get through a process. And incidentally, we're not necessarily suggesting that, there's like something magic that happens, on that 731st day if they haven't gotten through an approval. We may go through something that you see regularly where we're restarting something or something along those lines. So this wouldn't be intended to apply where applications are actively being worked on. But we have a certain percentage of applications, regardless of what they are, that just go fallow. We have correspondence with applicants. Typically, we will give them a set of comments that need to be addressed in order to bring plans into conformity with standards, and we just don't ever hear back. So we do like the idea in those cases of just having some date out there to where, okay, we're going to take it out of our system at this point in time if it hasn't been acted upon.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That does make sense.
It's really good business.
And you'll see that again with a different time frame for different applications. Moving along here. So same kind of thing on page 23 relative to an annexation application. So Legacy Farms, we've talked about that. That was about a 3-year actual application process on the annexation from when they submitted to when it actually got approved. Hence, we're not trying to shortchange somebody's opportunity to get through a process in a reasonable amount of time, but want to have that sunset. Next page, page 24. This is going to jump out at me because this particular application is different. This is a quasi-judicial application. The others are either legislative or administrative. We can't have an expiration date on this one. So please just pretend like this red language doesn't exist.
Okay.
There.
Okay.
Then on the next page, zoning text or zoning map amendments, the same as the general plan, 24 months. For a conditional use, like the two that you looked at tonight for Hearthstone and the storage units, 24 months, that's pretty generous. But again, we're just looking for kind of that backstop. Really not much relative to any of our zoning districts, any changes there. So, get a little quicker here.
Those are all those changes to homes?
Yep.
Yep, that's all that is, going from dwelling units to just saying homes.
46 looks like the next one, unless I missed something.
Thank you. This is kind of archaic, I think. And the concept here with the minimum district size is that, let's say you want to have your 6-acre piece of land that's maybe general planned for industrial uses, but currently zoned agricultural and is surrounded by agricultural land that's zoned agricultural. You want to have that 6-acre piece zoned industrial 1. The idea here is that in order to have a functional sort of district for industrial uses, there's a critical mass of property size that you need to make that happen. That's why this predates me by some time here. You would have sometimes minimum zoning district sizes. So if you have 6 acres, you want it zoned I1, the way we read now, you'd have to get some neighbor to participate as well in a zone change to meet that 10-acre minimum threshold. In 13 or 14 years, this hasn't been an issue for us. I don't see the need for it. The value that I see in eliminating this here is that it confuses applicants regularly.
Well, that IFA thing would have pertained to
Yeah,
that
that's true.
I-1.
That's true.
They wouldn't have 10 acres to be.
Or they wouldn't maybe have had the I-2 to start with, right? That type of a thing.
Yeah, okay.
So you're just saying eliminate that whole column then?
Exactly. Yep. Instead of self-storage units, self-storage buildings, then we have some, again, this is to clarify some things about standards. It's on page 48 is where I'm at next. You'll see this repeated in a few places. It seems like somewhere along the line, we've just missed some reference points. For some of our non-residential zoning districts, we have them in other districts. I think this is something that Brandon pointed out.
What does that double S mean?
Section mark or section?
That's a what?
That's, no, is that what it is?
It is.
Yeah, you're the paralegal.
Section?
15 is title,
Sitting in my old
chapter.
place so I can get my
section,
candy.
chapter.
I told Stacy to keep it loaded.
No, we do, we
Wondering what
we just want to know what this means.
That's right.
Yeah,
Usually we do, yeah, it means section.
It means where it's cited.
Yeah,
essentially.
Okay.
and the citation, you
Trust
would
Kim.
add.
Sorry, guys, I like to learn something every
In
day.
other words, what she's Kim's referring to is C.
All of
Oh. See at,
Yeah.
okay.
we don't have any caretaker residences in our commercial 2 zones any place in the community, and can't imagine that there's a situation where somebody would want that, or where we'd really want to see that happen. In some of the other zoning districts, we think it makes sense, but that's the next change that's down a little bit lower on the general commercial section, would just eliminate that as an accessory use. Then kind of the same thing with those reference points that we don't have in that particular zone, getting those in there. Again, that's just to provide some additional clarity. Page 54, likewise, for clarity's sake, just defining things a little bit differently. So in this case, you just see this section, and that's where you would get whatever the requirements would be for any kind of landscaping, buffering, which is like a transitional requirement or requirement for a wall. Adding then the caretaker's residence to the I-1 zone as a permitted use. In some instances, we permit storage units, for example, in the I-1 zone. That's kind of the most contemporary actual use that we have, where sometimes people still have caretaker.
So, something that came up tonight when we was talking about what's allowed in the I-2. In fact, Dan from the audience there was brought this up, that, so automotive repair and car wash show up in I-2.
Uh-huh.
Why is it showing up in I-1 too?
Our zoning is cumulative, is what it's called. So you start with a zone that's fairly restrictive, that limits your uses to a certain pool, and as you go up some kind of a continuum,
So
from
could-
one zone to the next, you simply add permitted uses to that. So you'll see a lot of the same uses.
So
the
car
vast
wash
majority.
might be in C2 as well.
It is.
Is
It
it?
is.
Oh.
So, I mean, we can talk about the I-2 for a minute.
That
The
seems kind
concerns with I-2 then become not any of the things that are also allowed in maybe the C2 or the I-1 zone, but it's the things that aren't allowed in those zones, which are largely found right here.
Couldn't that be worded better to where these are things you can't have? And I don't know, it seems really redundant to list
So if you're
restaurants
in
in
this zone,
four
you can
different.
have this, you can have item A, but if you go up to this zone, you get item A plus, now you get item B.
And you go up again, you get A, B, and C.
But isn't there a better way to do it?
Interactive type, an interactive type.
Uh-uh.
I mean, really, when it come up with restaurants at night too, I'm going, okay, we gotta redo our.
But at the same time, would you have a concern with a restaurant in an I-2 zone if somebody wanted to do that? Would you? Okay, and
So what's
then
the
we need to
airport?
talk about it.
What's the airport right now? What's the airport zone?
I-1, actually, probably public facilities, or I-1.
talking the restaurant on Main?
No, I'm just saying that like the airport, a lot of times airports have restaurants. So you'd want to be able to have a restaurant in a zone of the airport.
Or, I mean, if you had a big industrial district,
Yeah?
you'd probably expect to see
Acreage,
some
yes.
supportive uses.
Yeah, and have a restaurant right there to support those employees.
Maybe even things like, you know, they're archaic now, but you might have seen copy centers or different things like that in some of those environments at one point in time.
So you
But
think,
that's kind of the concept.
you think it's okay the way it is?
You know, yes.
You wrote it. Brandon, what do you think?
Other cities will do something simpler but the same style, so they may say uses permitted in the I-2 zone are A, B, C, and any uses allowed in the I-1 zone. Other cities will do a table or a matrix, and they'll
So
say,
they'll just show the
Same
one.
here's the zone, here's, just a visual image, so instead of having it replicated in each zone, you have its own list, you just have one table for all of the zones.
The legal effect is the same.
Yes.
It's just a matter of how you identify it.
Present it.
I like this because if somebody comes in, let's say they have property that's zoned I-2, and they want to know what they can do, it's 1.5 pages we give them. They don't have to cross-reference from one to see everything that's allowed in the
Okay,
I-1 and maybe the C2 and that one.
okay.
Maybe just change it and make a list of everything that's not allowed.
No, we can't do that.
No doubt.
That's,
You couldn't keep up with it.
we are not that smart.
Are we almost at the bottom of the list?
We're getting to the important parts.
Well, the important parts.
Other references to the caretaker dwellings in light of that question, I'm gonna go a little faster.
Quit interrupting.
Which is the point, right? To have a little bit of discussion. I do appreciate that.
Boy, it's really been on me tonight. Like a cattle prod.
Excuse me?
Shocker.
Okay, page 73, master plan developments. This has come up recently. Just clarifying that, hey, if you buy a piece of property that maybe has a big gas line going through it that makes a big part of it unbuildable, or a big power line that makes it unbuildable, or something like that, you don't necessarily have the right to take density from that unbuildable area and transfer it elsewhere on the property. And I wouldn't be surprised if you guys have a different opinion on this, but part of my motivation in suggesting that this be considered is that you don't necessarily want to allow for a lot more intense development on a smaller piece of property than what you'd expect with a certain zoning and a master plan development. Which I'm guessing that might not make a ton of sense to you guys, but maybe to use an example, if you have a 5-acre piece of property and somehow 3 acres of it is encumbered with easements, if you pictured what a project might look like if you were able to take all of the density from the 3 acres and consolidate it into 2, that might be an issue somehow for somebody.
So if this was all wetlands, you couldn't build on it, you said, well, I'm gonna put a 20-story high-rise right here and get the equivalent units, because I can't use this.
Same issue applies with wetlands and other unbuildable
Power
lands.
lines, things
We've already
like
been explicit in the code on that, so.
Is there a list of unbuildable, like an unbuildable list of things that are considered unbuildable?
It's not really explicit, but here's how the code reads now. For purposes of calculating the base density, that's how many units you can have in a project according to whatever zone you're in. Sensitive lands, so that's, for us, typically that's anything that might be in an identified fault zone. It might be on a hillside of a certain steepness. Most of the time it's wetlands. Sensitive lands, anything else? I mean, those are kind of the typicals. I mean, it could flat out be a pond or a lake or something like that, I guess, too. So those things. And then also,
Right of ways and easements, I'm sure, like canals and.
right, yep, that, but.
Dropping down power lines to go through Lacy Farms.
And that's the easement thing that we're talking about now. This was really popular when I started working 20 or so years ago. And lots of cities in Utah County have things explicitly written in code now that would say, okay, we went through this in Legacy Farms. You can have a church in your project, but you don't get density for something that you sell for a church, for example, or for a school. Those were 2 popular things, and developers, savvy developers, were able to double dip and again consolidate density into a smaller part of the project while they were selling part of the project for non-residential use. So we call some of that out as well.
We did that with Legacy, didn't we?
We made them
They brought
up
it-
their ante
They were
to
gonna put in the
justify it.
church,
Yep.
And then did we lower, or I guess, increase density on some of the back properties?
In exchange for
Allow
some
them to
things.
build 3 or 4 or 5 more homes.
Yep. That's exactly where that comes
Well,
from.
this would take that away and say you can't count it.
Well, you can't, and this doesn't change that issue with the church. That language is the same as it was when we first started talking with Fieldstone about that.
Okay.
And again, the way that we did it with Fieldstone was, in essence, we're not letting you count that church as part of your acreage calculation to establish how many units per acre you have. So when we took that acreage out, their units per acre went up. And with our master plan development program, they had room to go up, but they needed to provide additional amenities to justify that increase. And we got to a point that everybody seemed to feel comfortable with. On pages 78 and 79, we have a couple of other things that John Little has asked us to approve relative to how we measure setbacks in a couple of different cases. They're a little bit,
Issues he's having as a city inspector, saying.
and that's, thank you, I shouldn't mention this. These changes that are proposed like that, they're not because we have a one-off. At least typically, it's because things have come up enough times that we feel like it's time to clarify things in the ordinance. And that's why
I think it's good proactive to do this.
it makes life a lot easier. And it's not just for us, but I think people that are trying to navigate the ordinance and understand
Yep.
what they can and can't do. I think I mentioned earlier on an item tonight that we want to be predictable. Neighborhood meeting requirements on page 87. You know, again, the result of experience, we require applicants on certain projects to have a neighborhood meeting before a project's presented to the Development Review Committee. And among other things, we had an applicant that started holding their neighborhood meetings in other cities, which, you know, for me is a little bit on the mind-boggling side. Yeah, office in another city. The whole idea is to try to create a forum where you can get some legitimate dialogue between a developer and a neighborhood. And we think those need to be held in Spanish Fork. So just more clarity
Okay.
relative to that. Again, relative to electronic submittals, that's on the next couple of pages, 88, 89. Final plat applications, typically those move pretty quickly through our process. So that's on page 89, just saying that somebody has 12 months to get a final plat approved before
They wake up over there.
that expires.
He's gone to sleep.
Page 89.
We're clear to
89 and then on to 92. You got to multitask these days, right? That's the only way you can keep
He's
up.
over there buying
Got
something
it.
on Amazon.
Might use something.
Was you?
Playing the game.
I'm going to really blow through more of the electronic copy stuff. We are getting close to the end. Expirations for plat amendments and minor subdivisions, that's a year on each of those. On page 97, a little bit more clarity relative to, again, just the electronic application thing. Same with page 99. There are a couple more changes I want to touch on. It'll just take a second. The method of assessing impact fees on page 102. This was kind of a late add for us, so it's not going to be in your copy here, but I have it. To where we're just adding to the language that we have now. Language that reads, for those impact fees due with the building permit, the fee in place on the date the permit was applied for will apply. So we have made a practice of updating our impact fees annually. And basically this would be clear. I think this actually just clarifies what our process is, which is that the impact fee that you're going to be required to pay is the fee that is in place the day you have an application submitted. So that if you apply for a building permit the third week in June, but don't receive your bill for that permit, which you get after the review's done and it's ready to be issued, you know, there's not a change there that maybe is hard for you to predict or plan for. Common sense, I think.
Now, what if it reduces the impact fee, would we give them that benefit of the doubt and charge them a lesser?
For those impact fees due with the building permit, the fee in place on the date. That's not how I read it.
Up or down? Up or
You
down?
don't get the cheapest rate.
As an applicant, I would just say.
You'd withdraw and reapply. You would.
We had someone do that, they waited.
Oh, here it is. I found it on the floor.
Happens.
If they're able to do it.
We're down to a parking requirement for an instructional studio. Kim, I want to give you credit for that one.
What page on?
That was page 111.
Why are you giving Kim credit for that?
Is that yours? Did you come up with that one? Or is that Brandon? Parking requirement for instructional studio? It's hers. Yep. I thought it was hers. I think it's a good ad. Again, trying to be clear. 1 per 400 square feet is.
That didn't exist, that type of use didn't exist.
Not, the use existed, but we did not specify what the parking requirement
What are examples
was.
instructional? Dance studio.
Dance studio, gymnastics, boxing.
They love to go to industrial locations where parking is 1 per person on a shift, and then all of a sudden you have 30 kids in a dance studio, and there's no parking.
And all the dance moms watching.
Okay.
A couple of things on page 114. One of them, and these are repeated in our non-residential zones, a few different times, and I guess in our multifamily residential part as well. We're suggesting that above 7, actually we had a different 7 in that talks about bonding for landscaping improvements. So you don't have this language in front of you. It's in the version that was sent to you via email last week. And it simply says that that applicants are required to provide a deposit for a certain amount whenever landscaping is not completed before we issue a certificate of occupancy. So the real life way to explain this, I guess, is that it's January 15, a developer finishes a townhome structure, but it's January 15 and they can't do the landscaping around the structure. We don't want to keep people out of their homes that they've been anxious to move into as soon as they were finished. So we issue certificates of occupancy. We also don't want to leave those homeowners hanging should, for whatever reason, a developer not finish the development, the landscaping in this case, when he can do it the following growing season. So we require them to provide a financial guarantee that that's going to happen. They give us the guarantee, which is a cash bond typically, like exclusively. And when the work is done, they contact us, we inspect it. When we find that it matches the approved plan, we give the money back. It's fairly simple. And this spells it out in black and white what that process is.
And that doesn't exist now. This is an addition.
You know, it exists in practice. We've been doing that a long time. We probably needed to have this here well before now.
Okay.
So, the next one for me is significant. We live in a part of the world that rightfully so is very concerned about water use. And I think largely because of that, our landscaping requirements have been very permissive over the years in terms of not requiring people to do things that really require much water. We're seeing things get built, I think, increasingly in the community, though, that because they're stark, because it's gravel or rock or other things, where landscaping that's intended maybe to soften the aesthetic of a building, or maybe literally to make a site cooler, as you have something that's green and living on the property that does less to reflect light and to concentrate heat and different things of that nature. We've seen enough projects done that we think fall short in terms of just contributing to the community being a beautiful place, that the DRC felt very comfortable with and strongly about requiring some small percentage of the required landscaping to be turf.
Is this for all zones?
It ends up being for all zones, yes. So you'll see it repeated on pages 114, 15.
Couldn't do zero-scape in an entire yard? That's wording?
Yes, let's talk about that. First of all, for single-family homes, you can do zero-skeeping on your entire yard if you chose to do that.
Okay.
We're not suggesting that the requirement be employed on single-family homes or twin homes. But let's say you have a townhome development. And let's look at it this way. Let's say you have a 10-acre townhome development. And because your landscaping requirement for a townhome project is that 25% of the site be landscaped, you'd be required to provide a total of 2.5 acres of landscaping. So those numbers make sense. 10-acre development, which for us would probably be about 100 townhomes at 10 units to the acre. You have to have a total of 2.5 acres of landscaping to meet the minimum 25% requirement. With this in place, then 30% of that 2.5 acres would have to be turf. So you're down to 0.8 of an acre and change that would have to be turf. In the big scheme of things, I don't think it's a significant number. and the vast majority of the people that are developing in Spanish Fork today do it. This, for me, is it's a low bar to get over, but it kind of helps us force some of the lower common denominator folks that we work with to step up their game and to landscape sites differently, better.
Have any examples of where this might be driving this? Any projects last year that?
Athlete Development Center is having grass there.
They have some grass. Do they have, oh, sorry, I was asking. Almost more.
It's just all gravel, it seems like.
Is that what it is?
They do in the strip.
That's a good, that might be the only place that they have it though, yeah.
Maybe within the parking lot?
I don't think even in parking there's grass.
I think that's a good example.
So, yeah, it's pretty stark as far as the appearance goes.
There's a house by my house. I know we're not talking about single family, but
So like Wiggy Wash on Main Street is all xeriscape in the front.
I think it is.
So this would be an example where of that, 30% would have to be turf.
They'd have to employ some turf there, yeah.
Dang, what do you pay that guy? Because it isn't enough. I'm telling you what.
What you don't know is that he actually read your mind. So before you said it, he was going.
way ahead of you.
Here's already.
Do you want to know what you're gonna have for breakfast tomorrow?
There's already an AI development that'll do it 10 times faster than that. I don't know what you're gonna ask before you ask it.
So, with single-family homes then, like the one that he just showed, if I wanted to, say I had a whole bunch of cars and I wanted to hire Richard to come and just pour concrete in my entire front yard, legally, I have every right to do that.
No.
No.
Really?
That's not landscape
A
rock.
few years ago, we limited the amount of concrete that you can pour in your front
Concrete,
yard.
there is something in
Oh,
it.
wow.
Concrete or asphalt.
Is it a ratio of the yard size?
Yeah. And we're really permissive still on how much concrete you could have, but we'd require you to stop short of the whole thing.
Even if we paint it green.
Well, in Spanish Fork, we don't paint anything green, right? Come on.
That's pacing.
Red, maybe, but, yeah, that's a sensitive one for me. I spent a couple of years.
So this is another example then,
Yeah.
where
They would need to.
you're trying to,
That's not to say that, I think Wiggy Wash in particular, the way they added the rock and stuff, that's not a bad look at all. But when you look at it in the context, particularly like the neighbor,
yeah,
it's just such a stark
yeah.
change.
So there's quite a bit of that in the community. Has there been some research on staff coming up with that 30%? Is there any, like, other communities you've kind of
So the conversation that Brandon and I had,
dartboard and?
it's honestly, it's probably more of the dartboard than anything.
Really?
Not really wanting to set the bar super high, but just to get something in place to require people to think a little bit more about, among other things, having sites designed better. We
What's
talked
that?
about, after getting some other projects done though, going back and revisiting these provisions to add more definition. Brandon, I don't want to speak for you, but he's pointed out to me some excellent examples of developments on State Street, like North Orem into Linden, am I right? Where people have done a great job of integrating xeriscape with a little bit of turf, where the turf is at a very prominent, really visible location, and it's awesome. It really is.
It might not be 30%.
And it might be more than that. But in those cases, and he's dealt with specific code provisions that those communities have that require beyond just a minimum percentage, but a particular look to a landscaping plan and that design. So we want to be back with that. This is before you tonight, to be honest, because IHC with a really big site, and they have turf on their approved landscaping plan. They asked about, hey, we don't see that you require necessarily us to have this turf. Do you mind if we make a change and do it all in landscape rock?
Yeah, from a maintenance
So that's-
standpoint, that's a big
That's when it, and yeah, that's
savings.
funny because I've had landscape folks tell me that the easiest thing to maintain is grass. You just have to cut it. Xeriscaping, it's hand, whether you're, killing weeds with spray or you're
True.
pulling them. At some point in time, that becomes more maintenance intense than grass. Really, the
Or
only.
was it a water savings
I
maybe
think
they're looking
that's-
at?
Water savings is the motivator.
So the strip counts towards the 30%?
We count that towards the, yeah.
It's not gonna be too far in the future that you're gonna be changing this to either irrigatable or artificial, because that's gonna be perceived as a waste of water.
I think so. And
I mean, that's, in St. George, it wouldn't even, it's artificial.
That's a great.
A lot of place.
That's a great point. And in all candor, just relative to water, we're in a really different environment than St. George. Both as a community and I think as just a geography. We have water, we have a secondary irrigation system that's extremely efficient. I would expect pushback if we had different water rates than we do and some different things like that.
That's nice, that one.
Good example of that mix, right?
Yeah.
John Little's asked that we just rearrange where our building permit for fence requirements are a little bit. We take it from the bottom of the general fencing requirements and put it at the top. Just to mention, issuing building permits for fences, we don't charge anybody for them. We don't really want to influence anything about people's decision-making on fencing and how they do it, or different things like that. We're not talking about structural integrity or those types of things. We just don't want to have to tell somebody after they install a fence that they put it in the wrong place, either because it's maybe too close to their driveway, so they can't see, or a neighbor can't see around the fence as they're trying to back out, or too close to a corner, or in one of those places where maybe because of location or height, they have to change it. So we beg people, come talk to us. And, you can rest assured that if you follow a plan that you give us that we issue a permit for, you're never gonna have an issue. So that's why that language exists.
So with all the residential that gets built in the city, what percentage would you say of residents come in for a fence building permit?
That's a really good question.
Any idea?
We get a fair,
Ballpark?
we get a good, yeah,
A couple minutes, and I'll call it to you.
that's a good point.
Fencing companies, diligent and that kind of thing, you aware of it?
And most of the folks that we work with regularly, they get it. So they're in, a lot of fences get built by people like me. It's our building inspection clerical staff typically that issues those permits, though.
We've issued 75 as of the end of July.
Year to date.
Year to date, so that's through
January,
7
July
months.
was 75.
It's a fair number. And frankly, at the same time, that I'm aware of, we've probably dealt with 4 cases where somebody put a fence up without a permit, and we're telling them they have to change it. So that's the
And
motive.
last year, in total, from January to December, we issued 57 fence permits. 2017, we issued 36. So
It's a big year.
people are becoming aware that they do need the fence permits, and we,
Yeah.
and that is also us reaching out as code enforcement, as those issues are coming up. The remedy is they have to move them to the correct locations and get a building permit. So some of those permits are maybe initiated because we've reached out.
Probably.
Okay.
Thank you for your patience. That's what we're proposing tonight that you consider. Not really anything terribly urgent there on any of those provisions that I'm aware of. if you want to take time to mull it over or whatever, we can come back and maybe do this again next month. Or if you want to make the recommendation.
Do it again.
So is this a recommendation to the city council?
It is, and it's a public hearing. We actually have a public hearing.
Believe it or not, there's actually one issue on there that crossed my mind.
You better come
Okay.
up. Yeah.
I'm gonna go in, we're gonna go into public hearing here and listen to Jake.
And I don't want it to make everything about me or whatever, but
You have a page number?
yeah, just pick one. So where the definition of a building is being broadened or expanded, and then later on there was something about outdoor storage areas. There was maybe some overlap where, in my mind, for like a business, there might be some kind of an issue with something that was previously considered equipment, where it might be a permanent structure in the ground, but not technically like a silo or something, you know? So it's not a shed, it's not a warehouse, but it may be under this new definition of structure or building that we're having, more general, where now we're restricting the business use of something that's equipment, not necessarily. Does that make sense at all?
It makes
Is-
sense.
Okay.
Honestly, that's not what that's intended to pertain to on the outdoor storage, at least.
Could
You guys-
run into an issue with that?
Just to explain where I'm coming from, you might have got this ball rolling. Our intent here is to simply say that you can, among other things, there can be an outdoor storage area, whether it's related to an existing business that's on the site or not. So we've talked about some land that you have. If you wanted to store things there and have an outdoor storage area, this would do two things. I mean, it kind of clarifies that you can do that and have a standalone outdoor storage area. We then also would say you have to meet certain criteria that we have for an outdoor storage area, which is some screening and different things like that.
Setbacks as well?
That would and there is a setback from like a public street requirement and some different things like that, rather than, this kind of suggests, and I think it suggests erroneously, that you can only have outdoor storage if, like, you have some other business activity on the site. We get approached all the time about folks that want to just store things out there, whether it's a trucking company or and some other use. And you asked about a structure too.
Yeah, so with the definition of a structure, was anything that was built, right? Or how did, I just want to see that one again.
Let's see, I think what you showed up there wasn't what was in here. Like, buildings was referred to structure, and then you went to structure.
Anything built, placed for construction or parts of the ones used portable buildings for storage containers. Okay, so could that, like, could that, now that it's anything built, placed, or constructed, move from something that was once a building or a shed that required a permit to construct, that now we have like a grain silo or something we want to put up, now we have to go through a building permit process with it or anything, since it's technically built or constructed, not just with a roof and four walls? That makes sense?
Yeah, it does.
Would there be some kind of crossover now where it's like talking about equipment versus actual buildings?
So right now, you can read what we define it as with the structure.
I just know that,
Mike
like, for
tied
example, in the past, we never had to go through a building permit process to put up in the grain bin or something, because it's considered equipment.
Well, in grain bins, they might be subject to an agricultural exemption. I think that's what it is. By our current definition, I would say a grain bin needs a building permit.
Right.
I'll bet that's what our building official would say.
Just curious.
But there are exemptions for certain agricultural things too, and that might fit into that.
Seems like the
category.
changes had no consideration of anything along those lines anyway. It was
Probably
mostly
not.
meant for some kind of a
Probably not.
restrained residential situation, so.
That's most likely.
Well, that's fine, that's all I have to ask about.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks, Jake.
Any other?
Okay, move out of public hearing, and is there a desire to make a motion?
Make a motion that we recommend to the city council approval of the Title 15 amendment changes.
Second?
Second it?
Second, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. make a motion that we adjourn. Or Dave add something?
Seconded,
He's done, we're done.
third, fourth.
Get out.